The al-Maliki family moved to the United States from Iraq when Noor was 4 years old. She was the first of 7 children born to Faleh Hassan al-Maliki and Siyam. Her name, Noor, means light of God. Although she fully embraced American culture, she also maintained her Iraqi heritage. She spoke Arabic fluently and identified as a Muslim, like her parents. However, in early 2009, she moved out from her parents' home after a disagreement about her lifestyle choices, which included wearing tight jeans, makeup, having boyfriends, and participating in modeling. Noor's pictures, many taken from her Facebook and MySpace accounts, circulated widely on the internet. They featured a beautiful young woman with long black hair and a thoughtful expression. Noor seldom smiled in these photos, possibly due to her past experience with braces. However, her friends describe her as cheerful and humorous. At school, she was known for being fun-loving and easily made friends. She played tennis. Her style consisted of dark jeans, sandals, and flowing tops from Forever 21. In short, Noor was an American girl just like any other. At home, Noor lived in a much harsher environment. She was often responsible for taking care of her younger siblings. Her father, Faleh, was strict and controlling. He disapproved of her socializing with boys, wearing jeans, or sharing photos of herself online. Noor's main duty was to obey his orders, or face punishment. He believed that the only change in her life would come when she married a man he chose for her back in Iraq. However, Noor envisioned a different future for herself. Having spent 16 years in the United States, she dreamed of becoming a teacher, marrying someone she truly loved, and most importantly, having the freedom to make her own decisions. Noor's friends have different accounts of what happened, but it's evident that her marriage was a focus for her parents. They deceived her into traveling to Iraq by saying they needed to visit a sick relative, but once they arrived, Noor discovered that she was there to be married. It's unclear if a wedding actually occurred. Some friends say she only attended an engagement ceremony, while others believe she was married against her will. Her parents, in police reports, insisted that a marriage did happen. Regardless, Noor returned to Arizona a few months later, without a husband, and moved back in with her family. Friends say she missed her younger siblings, and her parents needed assistance in taking care of them. The al-Maliki family lived in a subdivision in Phoenix called Paradise Views, which looked comfortable and suggested they were achieving some of the tangible aspects of the American dream. Noor's mother had been hired by a California company to help prepare American soldiers for cultural differences they might encounter in the Middle East. This was an odd situation, given her struggle to fulfill a similar role in her own daughter's life. After Noor returned from Iraq, the atmosphere in the al-Maliki home became tense. Noor took care of her siblings and worked on her school assignments for her high school diploma. However, by May 2008, tensions peaked. Noor's father discovered a photo of her with male friends on MySpace and disapproved. The conflict escalated to the point where Noor considered moving out. One day, after Noor using the family car to visit a cousin, her father reported it stolen. When Noor found out, she abandoned the car on the side of the road and walked away. According to police records, her father wanted to press charges against her to teach her a lesson, claiming that she was bringing shame to the family and that her plans to move out looked bad. Eventually, Noor did move in with a friend, but after several confrontations with her father and discovering that her mother gave her friend's family a hard time, so she decided to return home. Noor's 20th birthday in February 2009 became a breaking point. After another family fight, this one in the middle of the night, she phoned a friend to come and get her. Noor came running out the door wearing her pajamas, carrying a purse and a roll of gift wrap, as her father chased her across the lawn. Noor jumped into the back seat, and the friend drove away. That night, Noor moved in with the friend who had picked her up, ultimately enlisting the police to protect her as she retrieved her things from the family home. In the spring of 2009, Noor got her own apartment. Her friends helped her furnish it with a new mirror and a cloudy TV they found on Craigslist for $25. Noor worked hard to support herself. When her parents learned where she was working, they started showing up and insisting that she move back home. She then got a job across town as a hostess at Applebee's. They turned up there too, leaving her no choice but to abandon that job as well. With no source of income, she was forced to return home once more. The final blow-up came that summer. In June 2009, longtime family friend Amal Khalif awoke to find Noor sleeping in the family's van parked in the driveway. Noor said her parents had hit her. Amal, a mother of 4, took her in. To Noor's family, this was the ultimate indignity. Their daughter had chosen to live with another Iraqi family instead of her own. On July 20th, Noor's parents entered Amal's home unannounced and began banging on her bedroom door. Amal dialed 911 after Noor's father started regularly harassing the family. Amal's husband, Raiken, explained to him that Noor was free to live where she chose. "This is America," he said. In the weeks that followed, Noor began a romantic relationship with Marwan, Amal's son. When Noor's father learned about this, he threatened her, insisting that if she didn't leave her current home, there would be severe consequences. Although Noor attempted to obtain a restraining order, she never completed the necessary paperwork. On October 20th, 2009, at 1:06 p.m., Noor sent a text message to a friend saying, "Her dad is here at the welfare office." She hadn't seen her father, Fele, since moving out of their home in Glendale months earlier, and his presence filled her with fear. She was aware that he would stop at nothing to regain control over her life. Noor was inside an Arizona Department of Economic Security office in Peoria when she sent the message, sitting next to Amal, Marwan's mother. The Al-Maliki family, especially Noor's father, felt anger and shame regarding her situation. In their view, a man's daughters are his property and must live with him until he chooses otherwise. Amal was at the office to fill out a change of address form for welfare benefits. Originally from Iraq, she had moved to the United States about 10 years ago. Since her English wasn't very strong, her friend accompanied her to help with translation. That day marked a troubling moment for Fele, as he took a disturbing step toward becoming an accused honor murderer. After her father entered the Department of Economic Security office, Noor sent a second text message to her best friend, Ashna Khan. Noor said that her dad was a manipulative jerk and that she had never met anyone so cruel. Meanwhile, Amal observed that Fele took a number at the counter and sat down near her and Noor. He was on his cell phone just as Noor was texting. He spoke for 5 minutes with his son, who was 18 months younger than Noor. Fele also chatted with a male relative in Detroit and his wife several times. Minutes after arriving, Fele left the office without saying anything. At 1:32, Noor sent a final text to Ashna that suggested she was feeling more at ease. Noor asked her friend if she would have time to meet. Eventually, Amal's number was called, and she and Noor approached the counter to handle their tasks. Amal remained suspicious of Fele, aware of his anger over her letting Noor move in with her. Before leaving the Arizona Department of Economic Security office, Amal wanted to check the parking lot for Fele and his 2000 silver gray Jeep Cherokee. Noor appeared less concerned. She mentioned that her dad might spit on her if he had the opportunity, but she seemed don't want to change her mind. The area looked clear, so they made their way to Amal's van. However, Amal soon realized that she had locked her keys inside the vehicle. She and Noor returned to the Arizona Department of Economic Security office to regroup. Amal then called her son and asked him to bring a spare key from home, which was about 20 minutes away. It was a sunny day with a temperature of 85 degrees Fahrenheit when Amal decided to wait outside the office. However, Noor was feeling thirsty and suggested they go to a nearby Mexican restaurant for a cold drink. As they walked west along the sidewalk beside the office and crossed the parking lot, Amal suddenly noticed a vehicle heading towards them. In a split second, she raised her hands instinctively to try to stop it. To her shock, she recognized Fele behind the wheel. The car collided with them, Amal dragging Noor across a raised median. The impact threw Amal about 27 feet away, leaving her unconscious and bleeding on the pavement. She sustained a broken pelvis, a broken femur, numerous cuts and bruises but remained conscious. The Peoria police later estimated that the car was traveling at about 30 miles per hour. Fele raced out of the parking lot and headed west on Peoria Avenue. Noor sustained critical injuries, including severe brain and spinal injuries, as well as multiple fractures. Amal later told police that they were extremely upset with both her and Noor over their living situation. She indicated that Fele was determined to assert his control over his daughter. Shortly after fleeing the scene, Fele made calls on his cell phone to his wife, son, and at least 2 other family members. It was unclear whether his attack on the women was impulsive or premeditated. 3 detectives from the Peoria police arrived at the Al-Maliki home at 5 p.m. on October 20th, about 3 hours after the incident. Noor's brother, Ali, answered the door. He found himself in a difficult situation. He had been close to Noor in the past, but the ongoing conflict between Noor and their parents had strained their relationship, leading to weeks of silence between the siblings. He later informed friends in an email that he had started using hurtful names for his sister before they stopped communicating. Ali told Detective Chris Bowie that tensions had been rising at their parents' home since Noor returned from Iraq after leaving her arranged marriage. In his opinion, Noor had brought shame to the Al-Maliki family. He claimed she had shown a lack of respect towards their parents and him since her return. She also continued to reject traditional Iraqi values. Ali shared his own struggles with his father, describing him as a habitual gambler who often visited Indian casinos in the Phoenix area. His mother, Siam, had been trying to reach him over the past few hours, indicating that something had happened to Noor. However, Ali insisted to the detectives that he had no knowledge of what had happened to her. On October 24th, Ali spoke to a television reporter about his sister. He mentioned that she had been making an effort to be disrespectful to their parents. He pointed out the differences between Iraqi and American cultures, saying, "Different cultures, different values. What makes sense to one culture doesn't necessarily make sense to another." Still, he expressed his profound sadness, saying, "Seeing Noor at the hospital just broke his heart. Nobody should have to go through that." Fele crossed the Mexican border into Nogales, Sonora, around the same time that Ali was being questioned in Glendale. He soon parked his Jeep in a mall parking lot and checked into a hotel. At 5:30 p.m., he called his cousin in Phoenix. The next day, October 21st, Peoria police issued a warrant for Fele's arrest, alleging at that point 2 counts of aggravated assault. That day, a detective contacted Noor's mother via phone. She mentioned that she was driving back from her job in California. She claimed that all she knew was that there was a family problem of an unspecified nature. The detective, Bill Lang, then informed Siam that her husband had intentionally slammed into Noor and Amal with his Jeep and fled. Siam told Lang that the woman was a liar and that her family was dirty, referring to Amal. Siam repeatedly insisted that she hadn't communicated with her husband about the incident. Bill informed Siam that Noor's condition was grave. Siam replied that she wanted to see her daughter as soon as possible, but the detective expressed concern that Siam and others might pose further danger to Noor. On October 22nd, 2 days after the assaults, a Glendale pharmacist informed police that someone had phoned in a prescription for Fele. He remained a fugitive. That day, Peoria detectives learned that on October 22nd, a young man, possibly of Middle Eastern descent, and a woman wearing a veil had picked up prescription medicine for diabetes in Fele's name. Detectives returned to the Ali home on October 26th for a follow-up interview with Ali and his mother, Siam. By then, the detectives had examined phone records, which showed that Fele had been in touch with his immediate family and others around the time of the assaults. Siam admitted that she had lied in her earlier interview with police but continued to deny knowing her husband's whereabouts. Mother and son also admitted they had picked up the medicine at the pharmacy, but Siam insisted she had thrown the pill bottles out of her car window, although she couldn't provide a reason for having done so. Siam again blamed her one-time friend Amal for what had happened in the Arizona Department of Economic Security office parking lot. Siam alleged that Amal got what was coming to her because she was the matriarch of a family that was allegedly flush with banned substance abusers and thieves. Later that evening, Ali met alone with Detective Bill at a Glendale restaurant, away from his mother. He provided new details of his father's call to him before the assaults. Fele had just seen Noor and Amal at the Arizona Department of Economic Security office, he said. Ali explained that his father sounded angry, so Ali told he to go home. However, Fele later phoned Ali to say he had run down Noor and Amal with his car. He told Ali to man up because he wouldn't be around anymore. On October 25th, British customs officials informed U.S. immigration authorities that Fele was in custody in London. He had arrived on a plane from Mexico City using his own name and U.S. passport. A computer check showed that Fele was a wanted man in Arizona. British customs soon put him on a Delta flight to Atlanta, where the federal authorities have a port of entry for incoming fugitives. On October 28, Mexican authorities in Nogales contacted Peoria police, reporting that they had found Fele's Jeep in a mall parking lot. Crime scene investigators later found hair fibers, human tissue on and under the front bumper of the vehicle. On October 29, Peoria detectives Chris Bowie and Jeff Balson sat across from their suspect in Georgia. Fele waived his Miranda rights against self-incrimination, allowing the detectives to question him. Initially, Fele told them that he had run over the two women in a freak accident. He tried to sound reasonable, why he would kill his daughter with a vehicle if he wanted to do so. Fele mentioned that if he wanted to kill her, he would go buy a gun and that he knew where they lived. He stated that he had no problem with her and that this was not the first time she had left the house. He insisted that he had just lost control of the car. Detective Bill warned him that anger could lead to loss of self-control. Fele continued to insist that no premeditation was involved. Like his wife, he blamed Amal for what had happened, claiming she had stolen their daughter from them. He insisted that he loved Noor, noting that his cell phone contained several photos of her, but he argued that it was wrong for her to become too Americanized. Fele claimed he had stayed at a Nogales hotel for 2 nights, during which time a stranger had given him about $1,900 in cash for his Jeep and agreed to make sure some paperwork got to Ali. Although unconfirmed, a more likely scenario, Fele's cousin or someone else close to Fele delivered the money, diabetes medicine, and a suitcase filled with clothes that Fele had with him when British authorities arrested him. Detective Bill asked Fele whether his family was on his side. Fele didn't reply directly. Instead, he said he would certainly help a friend or family member in a similar predicament. It's their culture, he explained. When Fele asked what he would do if he had such a disobedient daughter, Detective Bill replied that he would not run his daughter over with a car. He finally confessed that he had actually intended to harm Noor and Amal. Fele was booked into the Clayton County Jail, Georgia, and waived extradition on October 31st. The Peoria detectives escorted him back to Arizona. The judge set his bail at $5 million. Doctors at hospital pronounced Noor clinically brain dead at 7 a.m. on November 2nd. Several members, including her mother and brother, were by Noor's bedside when her heart stopped beating at 11:54 a.m. A urinary tract infection that spread to Noor's heart was the cause of death. Days later, a Maricopa County grand jury indicted Fele on charges of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, aggravated assault, and leading the scene of an accident. Noor's violent death struck a nerve worldwide, especially after a county prosecutor officially labeled it an honor killing. Noor's life was never the same after she rebelled against her parents and their culture, leaving her arranged marriage. Time and again, she tried to live with her family over the final year of her life, but it didn't work. Fele and Siam considered her tainted, someone who had humiliated them by leaving the Iraqi husband her father had chosen for her. Fele was furious when, after Noor returned from Iraq, he found a photo of her with several male friends. In his mind, Noor shouldn't have been chummy with men other than her husband, to whom she remained legally married. However, Noor stood up for herself. The photographs on her page were not racy, just images of a young woman with a beautiful face. Noor then found work as a server at an Applebee's restaurant, where she made new friends. One of her co-workers recalls that Noor quit after her father learned that she was employed at an establishment that served liquor. Some of Fele and Siam's concerns about their daughter's living arrangements may have been justified. Amal reported to Peoria police that she took in Noor because she had nowhere to go after leaving her parents' home. Amal's primary concern was providing shelter for Noor, not supporting a romantic relationship between Noor and her son. She emphasized that just days before the assaults, she encouraged Noor to reach out to her parents to start a conversation. Following his arrest and incarceration at the Maricopa County Jail, Fele regularly spoke on the phone with family members, unaware that authorities were secretly recording the calls. During one conversation, he asked his cousin, "How is she now?" They spoke in Arabic, which was later translated into English. When his cousin asked, "Who's she?" Fele replied, "Noor." His cousin then confirmed, "She's gone." His cousin advised he to take care of himself and to talk to their lawyers about making it clear that it was not supposed to be a murder. He also suggested that ask the Iraqi consulate to intervene with the American government, linking the situation to concepts of honor and dishonor. He stated, "An Iraqi is worth nothing without honor." Fele continued to talk with his wife about the issue of honor killings during their phone conversations. The trial began in January 2011 and was notable as the first honor killing case to be tried in Arizona. Amal Khalif testified for the prosecution. On February 22, 2011, a Phoenix jury convicted Fele al-Maliki, an immigrant from Iraq, of second-degree murder for running over and killing his daughter. Prosecutors labeled the case as an honor killing, arguing that Fele acted because he perceived his daughter as becoming too westernized. Fele was also found guilty of aggravated assault for injuring Amal Khalif during the incident in a parking lot in suburban Phoenix in October 2009. He faced 2 additional charges for leaving the scene of the accident. Defense attorneys argued that his daughter's death and the injuries to Amal were accidental, claiming he only intended to spit on Amal, whom he believed was influencing his daughter to distance herself from their family. However, during police questioning, a detective testified that Fele admitted to intentionally running over his daughter, though in the recorded interview he referred to the incident as an accident. Amal also testified during the 4-week trial, stating that he ignored Noor's cries to stop before he hit her. He showed little emotion when the jury read the verdict. In April 2011, Fele was sentenced, at age 50, on multiple counts. For murdering his daughter he was sentenced to 16 years, for injuring her boyfriend's mother he received 15 years, and for leaving the scene of a crime without permission he received 3.5 years. Because they are to be served consecutively, Fele received a total of 34.5 years in prison as his penalty. Ali and his family chose to remain silent during the sentencing. Accompanied by his 2 attorneys, Fele approached the lectern in front of the judge and began by apologizing in a soft voice to everyone present, to Amal, to his own family, and to the judge. "Fele wish he were dead instead of Noor," Fele said. The expression of remorse was a far cry from what he had said to his wife in the secretly recorded jailhouse tapes after his arrest. The tapes revealed that his sole concern was how to fabricate a story that would divert attention from him. Judge Steinle took more than half an hour to impose the sentence. He stated that it had troubled him from day one that the press had given the case a moniker. It was referred to as an honor killing, and this bothered him. He cannot believe that a religion would allow someone to kill another human being. He would be in prison for 13 more years before dying on November 10, 2024, at 63 years of age. Fele al-Maliki's conviction and 34.5-year sentence brought legal justice, but it could not undo the loss of a vibrant young woman. Noor's story remains a poignant reminder of the cost of intolerance and the enduring fight for individual autonomy. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of the DeFeo family. To truly understand it all, let's first get to know the DeFeo family, who once lived in a house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, Long Island, New York. Ronald Joseph DeFeo Sr., more commonly known as Big Ronnie, was born on November 16, 1930, to parents Rocco and Antoinette DeFeo. When he was younger, Big Ronnie was slender, handsome, and had a powerful gaze reminiscent of the legendary Rudolph Valentino. With his suave looks, he attracted the attention of Louise Marie DeFeo, who was born on November 3, 1931, to Michael John Briganti Jr. and Angelina Maria Briganti. Louise had aspirations of becoming a model. She was beautiful enough to mingle with the best, including the famous singer Mel Torme. After a brief courtship, Big Ronnie and Louise married. However, the Briganti family disapproved of Big Ronnie, cutting all ties with the newlyweds until September 26, 1951, when their son Ronald DeFeo Jr. was born. He would later be known as Butch. Growing up, Butch faced many struggles as the firstborn son. His father expected a lot from him, and Big Ronnie was not afraid to discipline Butch in harsh ways. One minute he would hug his son, and the next he would throw him across the room. Louise's brother, Michael John Briganti Jr., would later testify at the DeFeo trial about an incident he witnessed when Butch was only 2 years old. He recalled, "They were all sitting down in the basement watching TV, and he don't know what the boy had done, but all of a sudden, the father just pushed the boy into the wall. The boy banged his head or part of his shoulder or something." As a child, Butch was extremely overweight, a problem that would persist until his late teenage years when he began using amphetamines. His school life suffered as a result, with bigger kids often teasing him and calling him names like the Blob, Bucky Beaver, and Pork Chop. On July 29, 1956, Louise gave birth to a daughter, Dawn Teresa DeFeo. A few years later, on August 16, 1961, Louise gave birth to Allison Louise, and then again on September 4, 1962, to Mark Gregory. Sometime after Mark's birth, Louise decided to leave her husband for reasons that remain unclear. To win her back, Big Ronnie determination to express his love. On October 24, 1965, Big Ronnie was blessed with a third son, John Matthew. By this time, the family had moved from their Brooklyn apartment to a lavish home on the south shore of Long Island in the affluent community of Amityville. Many wondered how Big Ronnie, working as a car dealer service manager, could afford such a luxurious home. The answer was clear: his father-in-law, Michael John Briganti Sr. In the early 1970s, Big Ronnie decided he wanted life-sized portraits to immortalize his family. Michael Jr. picked up the tab, which was estimated to be at least $50,000. The painstakingly detailed portraits took over a year to complete, and when finished, they hung in large golden frames on the staircase wall between the first and second floors of the DeFeo home. By this point, Butch had become increasingly troublesome as he got older. The DeFeos owned an auto body shop where Butch worked, but he spent more time at bars than actually working. His growing addiction to banned substance and alcohol only made things worse, driving him to violence against his own family. There was even an incident where he pulled a gun on his father, and countless other times he lashed out physically at those closest to him. Then, in the early hours of November 13, 1974, Butch completely snapped. Armed with a rifle, he moved silently through the house, murdering his family members one by one as they slept. What's truly chilling about this is that, despite the brutal killings taking place within just 15 minutes, the bodies showed no signs of struggle. Even more bizarre, the sound of gunshots didn't wake any of the other family members, or at least didn't rouse them from their beds. The bodies were found all face down on their beds, almost as if they had been carefully placed that way. To add to the eerie nature of the crime, the rifle had no silencer, yet aside from the family dog barking, none of the neighbors reported hearing a single gunshot that night. After committing the horrific murders, Butch calmly took a bath, got dressed for work, and then reported the crime, claiming he discovered the gruesome scene after returning home. He even suggested that a mafia hitman, Louis Fellini, along with 2 accomplices, was responsible. However, a police interview soon revealed serious inconsistencies in his story. The next day, Butch admitted to carrying out the murders himself. Fellini, the supposed hitman, had an airtight alibi, proving he was out of state at the time of the killings. DeFeo confessed, saying, once he started, he just couldn't stop. It went so fast. He went on to explain how he took a bath, changed his clothes, and carefully disposed of key evidence, including his blood-stained clothes, the Marlin rifle, and cartridges, before going to work as if nothing had happened. It was claimed that Butch had been hearing voices that urged him to commit the murders. However, the prosecution brought in a psychiatrist. According to the psychiatrist, Butch wasn't hearing voices or possessed by another personality. He simply didn't see anything wrong with killing his family. Because of that, DeFeo was convicted on 6 counts of murder and sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms, which he continued to serve at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in New York until he died on March 12, 2021. Just over a year after the tragic deaths of the DeFeo family, the home on Ocean Boulevard was sold to the Lutz family, who would soon unknowingly step into a new chapter of horror. The Amityville home, marked by its horrific past, raises the question of whether the tragic events left behind some lingering eerie energy haunting the land where it all unfolded. However, the Lutz family wouldn't have to wonder for long. They would soon share their own unsettling experiences in the home. Although the price was a bit higher than their budget of $30,000 to $50,000, something about the house pulled them in. It was a beautiful colonial-style home with 6 bedrooms, a heated pool, and a boathouse sitting right on the Amityville River. Don't think for a second that the Lutz family wasn't aware of the horrific murders that had taken place there. In fact, they knew all about the house's dark past. But despite that, the Lutzes fell in love with the property and decided it was meant to be theirs. They bought the house for a bargain price of $80,000, never once thinking it was unlivable because of its tragic history. However, what was supposed to be their dream home soon turned into a waking nightmare. The strange and terrifying events that followed were later shared with the world by author Jay Anson in his famous book, The Amityville Horror. Before moving into the house, George Lutz was a successful businessman, but after settling in new house, something changed. He became sluggish, cold, and irritable. Most bizarre of all, he started waking up at 3:15 in the morning every night, unable to get back to sleep. It wasn't just random, it was the exact time the DeFeo murders had occurred. One night, George was startled to see his 5-year-old daughter, Missy, standing by her bedroom window. But what sent chills down his spine was the eerie outline of a pig's face with glowing red eyes staring at him from behind her. He rushed into her room, only to find Missy sound asleep, as if nothing had happened. Not long after, Missy talked about a new friend, an imaginary pig named Jody. But was Jody really imaginary? In another bone-chilling moment, George looked at his wife Kathy as she lay sleeping, but something was horribly wrong. Her face had distorted and aged, as if she'd become a 90-year-old woman overnight. At times, Kathy seemed to undergo strange transformations, aging rapidly and looking like someone else entirely. Her mother even witnessed this unnatural change firsthand. But the strange events didn't stop there. The house seemed to have a mind of its own. Doors were ripped off their hinges, and in the middle of a freezing winter, a room was suddenly filled with flies. Outside, cloven hoofprints appeared in the snow, right near their doorstep. Inside, green slime started to ooze down the walls, and then in the basement, they discovered a hidden room that didn't appear on any of the house's original blueprints. The room was painted a deep, unsettling red and was only large enough for 2 people to sit close together. But what was even more disturbing was the faint rancid odor that lingered in the room, adding to the overwhelming sense of dread that hung in the air. George even tried bringing their family dog into the mysterious basement room, but the animal refused to step inside. The usually dog backed away, tail tucked, and whimpered in fear. It was the first time George had ever seen the dog so terrified, as if it sensed something lurking in the shadows, something invisible to human eyes but deeply unsettling to an animal's instincts. The eerie experiences didn't stop there. One night, George was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of a band playing downstairs. The lively music echoed through the house as if an invisible group was holding a late-night gathering. Confused and unnerved, he made his way to the living room to investigate, but the moment he stepped inside, everything went silent. No music, no people, nothing. Yet something had definitely been there. The rug had been rolled up, and the furniture had been shifted, as if a dance floor had been cleared for a ghostly celebration. Desperate for help, the Lutz family reached out to a priest, hoping for some kind of blessing or relief from the terrifying events. However, the moment the priest stepped into the house, things took a dark turn. He was overwhelmed by a sudden intense sickness and began to experience his own set of unexplained disturbances. Some force seemed to be warning him to stay away. The impact of these events reached far beyond the Lutz family. Author Jay Anson recalled how meeting the priest convinced him that this was more than just a story, it was real. From there, he started to create the book. On January 14, 1976, After just 28 days of living in what they thought would be their dream home, the Lutz family experienced a night so terrifying that they made a split-second decision. They packed a few bags, left everything else behind, and fled, never to return. According to a 2005 interview with George Lutz, he emphasized that their departure wasn't planned. They didn't wake up that morning thinking they were leaving for good. This was their home. When they left, they didn't know they wouldn't be coming back. They didn't know that everything they left behind they would never see again. Their abandoned belongings, untouched and frozen in time, were later set to be auctioned off. The house that had once seemed like a fresh start had turned into something they could never return to. Determined to share their horrifying experience, the Lutz family recounted every chilling detail to writer Anselm. He would go on to transform their story into the instant bestseller in 1977. The book gripped the public, with the Los Angeles Times calling it both fascinating and frightening. Some critics believed its success wasn't just about ghosts and haunted houses. They argued that the story resonated with people because of the unstable political and economic climate in the United States at the time. Rampant inflation, rising interest rates, a crippling oil shortage had left the country anxious and uneasy. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that the horrors inside the Amityville house weren't the only ones haunting the Lutz family. Their business was struggling due to the failing economy, and at the worst possible time, the IRS launched an investigation into their taxes. For many readers in the late 70s, this felt all too real, paranormal or not. Financial stress and uncertainty were things they knew all too well. By blending supernatural terror with real, life struggles, the Amityville horror struck a nerve with the American public. It wasn't just a ghost story, it was a reflection of the fears people were living with every day. Some critics even argued that the book cleverly capitalized on popular horror trends of the time, the trope of a once-loving father turning violent and unrecognizable. When asked if he had experienced anything strange while writing the book, Anselm quickly dismissed the idea, replying, "No, however, he did suffer a heart attack soon after finishing it, though he insisted it was due to his smoking and unhealthy lifestyle rather than anything paranormal." But while Anselm shrugged off any supernatural connection, eerie incidents followed those who got too close to the story. Several people who handled early copies of the manuscript reportedly had near-fatal encounters. One of Anselm's friends had a fire break out in his car while driving the manuscript back to the publisher. Another friend and his son nearly drowned when their car plunged into the water, but when rescuers opened the trunk, the manuscript inside was mysteriously dry, despite being stored in a simple clasped envelope. In the most chilling case, a woman who had been given the first 2 chapters to read died in a house fire the very night she received them, and among the charred remains of her home, the pages of the manuscript were found completely untouched. The terrifying tale of the Lutz family has since been adapted into several films, with the most famous being the 1979 version starring James Brolin. In 2005, the Amityville Horror returned to the big screen with Ryan Reynolds stepping into the role of George Lutz, following in the footsteps of James Brolin. Both movies stayed true to the eerie backstory of the infamous house where a gruesome mass murder had taken place, but they each took creative liberties to crank up the terror. Then there's how the house itself is portrayed. The older film leans into the idea that the house is a sinister entity influencing Ronald DeFeo Jr. to kill his family in 1974, while the remake shifts the horror to the ghosts of the victims, making them the primary source of terror. The priest who tried to help the Lutz family also meets different fates depending on the version. In the book, he hears a voice commanding him to get out and later becomes ill, eventually giving up on helping the family. The films, however, escalate the horror, showing him being attacked by swarms of supernatural flies and even going blind. Regardless of these differences, one chilling fact remains: an entire family was murdered in that house. Yet despite the Lutz family's claims of paranormal experiences in 1975, no other owners have reported hauntings since. According to the Washington Post and real estate firm Coldwell Banker, Harbor Light, 4 different families have lived in the house after the Lutzes. A previous owner even had the address changed to avoid unwanted attention. The last time the house went up for sale was in the summer of 2016, and it was sold in February 2017 for just over $600,000, significantly less than the $950,000 it was purchased for in 2010. As for the real murders that took place, while Butch was eventually found dead in his prison cell, there are countless versions of events and interviews he gave before his death. In an interview from 1986, Butch claimed that his sister Dawn killed their father, and that their mother killed his siblings before he killed her. He later filed a motion in 1990 stating that Dawn and an unknown assailant were the real killers, that he only shot Dawn by accident during a struggle. Despite his shifting stories, his claims were always met with skepticism. In 2000, he spoke with author R.I. Auna, asserting that his parents plotted to kill him, which led him to join forces with Dawn and others in desperation. Butch's narrative continued to evolve, becoming increasingly distant with details about the events and unreliable witnesses. His claims, including involvement from his wife Geraldine Gates, only deepened the mystery, with authorities and experts disproving many of his assertions. Now, it's easy to lean toward the idea that Butch was simply a psychopath driven by childhood trauma or addiction, who saw no problem in killing his family. However, if the lingering souls of his victims did haunt the Lutz family, we can only hope they found justice and peace. The saga of the DeFeo family in the house at 112 Ocean Avenue remains one of the most haunting and enigmatic chapters in American crime and lore. From Ronald Butch's cold-blooded slaughter of his family in 1974 to the Lutz family's harrowing 28-day ordeal a year later, the Amityville horror transcends a mere murder case, weaving a tapestry of trauma, mystery, and supernatural intrigue. Butch's shifting confessions and unrepentant nature leave us questioning whether his actions stem from a fractured mind or something darker, while the Lutz's flight from inexplicable terror suggests the house itself may hold echoes of its violent past. Decades later, with Butch gone and the house standing quietly under new ownership, its legacy endures, immortalized in books and films, yet shrouded in doubt. Whether driven by human evil or lingering spirits, the tragedy of Amityville serves as a chilling reminder of the shadows that can lurk within families and homes, leaving us to wonder where the line between reality and nightmare truly lies. Joshua Powell was born on January 20, 1976, in Puyallup, Washington, to Stephen and Terica Powell. He had 4 siblings: Michael, John, Jennifer, and Alina. However, life in the Powell family was far from normal. Their father, Stephen, was controlling and inappropriate, fostering a toxic atmosphere for his children. He shared adult material with his sons and set no boundaries, exposing them to adult content that influenced their behavior. As a teenager, Joshua acted out violently. He once killed his sister's pet gerbil in a fit of anger. He also threatened his mother with a knife during an argument, and when he felt desperate, he threatened to harm himself. In 2000, Joshua met Susan Cox at a church dinner. She was kind, hardworking, and full of life, and they got married within a year. Unbeknownst to Susan, her marriage would encounter serious challenges. Initially, they lived with Joshua's father, Stephen, in Washington, and that was when things became really disturbing. Stephen began to obsess over Susan. He watched her with a camera, used a small mirror to look into the bathroom, stole her underwear from the washing machine, read her diary, and posted love songs online under a pseudonym. Finally, one day, he confessed his feelings to Susan. This conversation, which included Susan's panicked rejection, was accidentally recorded on his own camera. It became the final straw. Joshua and Susan decided to pack up and move to Utah, hoping to forget about Stephen. For a while, life seemed to stabilize for Joshua and Susan, who had 2 sons named Charlie and Braden. They relocated to West Valley City, Utah, in search of a fresh start. However, Susan felt increasingly suffocated in her marriage. Her friends noticed her unhappiness and learned that Joshua hardly showed her any affection, creating a sense of distance between them. By the summer of 2008, their situation had deteriorated significantly. Joshua and Susan argued constantly, even in front of their children. Joshua had become extremely controlling, making all the decisions and leaving Susan feeling trapped. Their marriage was not just struggling, it was falling apart. He took complete control of their finances, forcing Susan to rely on him for even minor expenses. He reduced their grocery budget, refused to buy her new clothes, and required her to justify every dollar she spent. While he guarded their bank accounts, he had no issue spending money on himself, wasting thousands while Susan struggled to afford basic necessities. The issue extended to their vehicles as well. Although they owned 2 cars, Joshua claimed the family car as his own. Instead of allowing Susan to drive to work, he made her ride a bike, regardless of the weather or her fatigue. Moreover, he started to distance himself from their shared faith. Although they had been active members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Joshua began refusing to attend services with Susan and their sons. He mocked her beliefs, made excuses to avoid church, and discouraged her involvement. The most painful betrayal came when Joshua refused to sever ties with his father, Stephen, despite Susan's insistence that he was dangerous and unwelcome in their lives. Joshua ignored her concerns, continued to communicate with his father, and allowed their young children to maintain contact with him. By 2007, Joshua had accumulated over $200,000 in debt, adding to their marital strain as Susan recognized that their situation was worsening. In response, she began documenting everything. In 2008, Susan created a video documenting the damage in her home, which she attributed to Joshua. That same year, she wrote a secret will ominously stating that if she were to die, it might not be an accident, even if it appeared to be one. Just a year later, she disappeared without a trace. On December 6, 2009, everything seemed normal. That morning, Susan, Charlie, and Braden went to church as usual. Susan interacted with friends and tended to her boys, and nothing appeared out of the ordinary. After church, a neighbor visited the family and spent some time with them before leaving. No one could have predicted that this would be the last time anyone would see Susan. The following morning, December 7th, something felt off. Susan didn't show up for work and hadn't called in sick or requested a day off. At the same time, the boys' nanny noticed that Joshua hadn't dropped them off, which was unusual for him. Concerned, she tried to contact the family, but no one answered. As hours went by without any word from Susan or Joshua, worry turned to fear. Joshua's mother, Terica, and his sister, Jennifer, learned about the situation and rushed to the house. When they arrived, they found the doors locked, the curtains drawn, and no one inside. The unsettling silence heightened their anxiety. They knocked and called out, but received no response. In a state of panic, they called the police. Officers arrived and forced entry into the home, fearing that the family might have been victims of carbon monoxide poisoning or faced another emergency. What the officers discovered inside the house was deeply concerning. Although the house was empty, something felt wrong. Susan's purse, wallet, and identification were still there, untouched. Her cell phone was later found in the family's only car, a Chrysler Town & Country minivan that Joshua had been using. It was turned off. There were no signs of a struggle, but one detail stood out. 2 box fans were set up in the living room, blowing air directly onto a damp spot on the couch. This unusual detail felt unsettling. Hours later, around 5 p.m., Joshua returned home with his sons, Charlie and Braden. The police quickly brought him in for questioning. His explanation was strange. He claimed that after midnight on December 7th, he took his 2 young sons, ages 4 and 2, on a spontaneous camping trip to the Pony Express Trail in western Utah, a remote area characterized by snow and freezing temperatures. He mentioned that Susan stayed home to sleep. His story raised many questions. Who would take toddlers on an impromptu camping trip in sub-freezing weather in the middle of the night, especially when they had work and daycare to prepare for in just a few hours? Police found it suspicious that Joshua had not notified his boss about not coming to work that day. When asked why, he gave a puzzling answer. He claimed he had lost track of the days and thought it was Sunday instead of Monday. Investigators aimed to confirm his story by sending a team to the area where he claimed to have camped. However, they found no evidence to support his claim, no tire tracks in the snow, no footprints, no fire pit, nothing. It was as if he had never gone on that trip. things took an even stranger turn. On December 8th, after a second police interview, Joshua suddenly rented a car from Salt Lake City International Airport and then disappeared for nearly 18 hours. His whereabouts during that time remain unknown. When he finally reappeared, he called his mother from Interstate 84 in Tremonton, Utah, sounding disoriented and giving vague answers about his location. Later, he told his sister Jennifer that he had been driving around the city aimlessly, randomly getting on and off different freeways. When police examined the rental car, they found that he had added 87 miles to the odometer. Where did he go? What was he doing? No one knows, but it was becoming increasingly evident that Joshua was concealing something. 2 days after Susan went missing, the police conducted another search of her home. This time, they found something concerning on the floor, traces of Susan's blood. While it wasn't a large amount, it was enough to raise serious questions. Inside the house, they also discovered life insurance policies totaling $1.5 million and a handwritten letter from Susan. In the letter, she expressed her growing fear for her life and mentioned being terrified of Joshua. Years later, DNA tests confirmed that one blood sample belonged to Susan, while another matched an unknown male, whose identity remains unknown. As the police investigated Joshua's actions following Susan's disappearance, his behavior appeared increasingly suspicious. He emptied her retirement accounts, canceled her chiropractic appointments, and withdrew his sons from daycare, all within days of her vanishing. It seemed he was trying to erase her from their lives. Additionally, Joshua had previously talked to co-workers about how to dispose of a body in an abandoned mine shaft. At the time, people dismissed it as a strange comment, but now, it seemed more significant. As investigators worked to understand what happened to Susan, they questioned the only other witnesses present with Joshua that night, his sons. 4-year-old Charlie was interviewed, and surprisingly, he confirmed that the camping trip took place. However, his account included a significant twist. He claimed that their mother was with them. According to Charlie, Susan was in the car that night but never returned home. Weeks later, a teacher overheard Charlie make a chilling remark, stating that his mother was dead, without any details or explanations, suggesting he had come to accept this reality. Additionally, Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, reported a troubling incident. At daycare, Charlie's younger brother, Braden, drew a picture of a van. When asked about it, Braden pointed to the back of the van and said, "Mommy was in the trunk." This raised further suspicions for the police, who were becoming increasingly convinced that Joshua was aware of what had happened to Susan. They intended to bring Joshua in for further questioning and requested all footage of his interviews with local news outlets. However, Joshua showed no willingness to cooperate. On December 14th, he obtained legal representation. In the following days, he became more distant and less responsive to the authorities. Just before Christmas, he gathered his sons and left Utah, returning to Puyallup, Washington, to live with his father, Stephen Powell. By December 24th, police identified him as a person of interest in the case. Sadly, the situation was far from resolved. In 2010, Joshua moved into his father's house in Puyallup, bringing his 2 young sons, Charlie and Braden. Joshua made it clear he wasn't returning to Utah, announcing plans to rent out their home in West Valley City. Some reports indicated he left due to losing his job, but those who knew him felt he was fleeing from something. Shortly after settling in Washington, a website called SusanPowell.org emerged. It claimed to be the official site for Susan Powell, but instead of helping to find her, it focused on defending Joshua. The site accused Susan's family, including her sister Jennifer Graves, and even the LDS Church of conducting a smear campaign against him. Some posts went so far as to suggest that Susan had fled to Brazil with another missing person, journalist Stephen Kocher, a completely unfounded theory. It didn't take long for people to suspect that Joshua and his father, Stephen, were behind the website. Then, by late 2010, the Powells made a startling claim. They suggested that Susan had been mentally ill and had intentionally abandoned her family. This seemed like a desperate attempt to change the narrative, but Susan's parents quickly rebutted it. There was no evidence to support the idea that Susan left on her own or that she was mentally unstable. While Joshua tried to portray himself as the victim, the police began focusing on his father, Stephen. A family friend revealed that Stephen had been obsessed with Susan for years. When investigators examined Stephen's computers, they discovered 4,500 images of Susan, many taken without her consent. These were not just ordinary photographs, they included disturbing close-ups of her body. Police began investigating Joshua's brother, Michael Powell, after he displayed suspicious behavior. Shortly after Susan went missing, he sold his broken Ford Taurus to a junkyard in Pendleton, Oregon. This raised eyebrows, especially when he later requested satellite images of the lot, seemingly to monitor the car. When authorities tracked it down, they used cadaver dogs, which indicated that human remains had once been in the trunk. Unfortunately, DNA tests did not yield conclusive results, leaving a key question in the case unanswered. In September 2011, police thought they had a significant lead. While searching Topaz Mountain in Utah, a location frequently visited by Joshua, they discovered what looked like a grave site. The ground appeared to have been recently disturbed and showed signs of digging. Investigators spent several days examining the area, but ultimately found no remains. Meanwhile, tensions between the Joshua families and the Susan families escalated. After police searched Stephen's home, both he and Joshua took to the media to advocate for their side of the story. Stephen claimed that he and Susan were developing a romantic relationship before her disappearance, using old journal entries from her teenage years to argue that she had always been unstable. A judge did not accept this narrative. He ruled that Stephen and Joshua could not publish any of Susan's personal writings and ordered them to return or destroy any journals they had already made public. Then the situation escalated. On September 22, the police arrested Stephen on charges of voyeurism and child abuse. Investigators found secretly recorded videos in his home featuring young girls, adult women, and, most alarmingly, Susan. It was apparent that Stephen posed a serious danger, and authorities began to suspect that Joshua might not be innocent either. John Long, Washington's Assistant Attorney General, announced that Joshua was now part of the investigation. The day after Stephen's arrest, Susan's father, Chuck Cox, filed for custody of his grandchildren, Charlie and Braden. Initially, the court granted him only temporary custody, allowing Joshua the opportunity to regain custody if he moved out of Stephen's home. Joshua rented a house in South Hill, Washington, presenting it as if he were complying with the order. However, authorities later claimed he never actually lived there. By this time, Joshua's sister, Jennifer, publicly expressed her belief that he was involved in Susan's disappearance. As the custody battle escalated, the court ordered Joshua to undergo psychological evaluations. A forensic psychologist, James Manley, evaluated Joshua and discovered concerning patterns. Joshua denied having any normal human flaws or weaknesses and displayed highly controlling behavior toward his sons. He also exhibited signs of deep paranoia, frequently blaming the police and media for his difficulties. Despite these findings, there was no direct evidence of abuse. Therefore, Manley allowed Joshua to visit his sons several times a week, under the supervision of a social worker. However, in January 2012, everything changed. When examining computers seized from Joshua's home, police found about 400 images of child abuse, bestiality, and incest. The images had been cached from a previous owner, but Joshua had viewed them. Although they weren't illegal, the psychologist handling his case was deeply concerned. Joshua was ordered to undergo a full psychological evaluation and a polygraph test. As the pressure mounts, Joshua becomes desperate and is about to commit a horrific act that no one could have imagined. On February 5, 2012, social worker Elizabeth Griffin Hall pulled up to Joshua's house in South Hill, Washington, for what was supposed to be a routine supervised visit between him and his two young boys, Charlie and Braden. The court had ordered these visits to be monitored for the children's safety, so Hall was there to ensure everything went smoothly. However, the moment she arrived, something felt off. As soon as the boys reached the front door, Joshua yanked them inside and slammed it shut right in Hall's face. She barely had time to react before she heard the deadbolt click. She pounded on the door, shouting for him to open it, but he didn't respond. Panicked, she pulled out her phone and called 911. Her voice shook as she told the dispatcher what had just happened, that she was supposed to be supervising the visit, that Joshua had locked her out, and that she feared for the boy's safety. She begged them to send help quickly. Immediately afterwards, a terrible explosion occurred, shaking the house. The force of the explosion propelled Hall backward. Within seconds, flames erupted, engulfing the home in thick black smoke. The intense heat scorched the air around her, leaving her immobilized by fear. Neighbors rushed over, some shouting and others already calling emergency services, but it was too late. The fire spread rapidly, and there was no chance for anyone inside to escape alive. Investigators later confirmed their initial suspicions. Joshua had planned this act. It wasn't an accident or a tragic gas leak. He had doused the house in gasoline, turning it into a death trap. Officially, Charlie and Braden died from carbon monoxide poisoning, but the reality was more horrific. Joshua had attacked them with a hatchet before starting the fire. The day before the tragedy, he emptied his bank account, donated the boys' toys to charity, and sent cold, emotionless goodbye emails to family and friends. Charlie and Braden were buried beside their mother, whom they would never see again, but their family's struggle continued. A year after Joshua took the lives of his two young sons and himself, his brother Michael tragically followed suit. On February 11, 2013, he ended his own life. His ending his own life sparked even more suspicion. In 2012, police questioned him several times about his abandoned Ford Taurus, which was found at a wrecking yard in Oregon. When asked why he left it there, he was vague and did not provide clear answers. Investigators later indicated they believed both Joshua and Michael were involved in Susan's murder. Despite extensive searching, Susan's case remained unsolved and hopeless. By May 21, 2013, the West Valley City Police officially closed the investigation into her disappearance. In the same year, James Manley, the psychologist who assessed Joshua for the state of Washington, acknowledged that he had always suspected Joshua was connected to Susan's disappearance. However, he did not include these suspicions in his official report, as his role was to evaluate Joshua's parenting, not to investigate a crime. The legal dispute over Susan's estate continued for years. In March 2015, Susan's father, Chuck Cox, finally prevailed in a lengthy legal battle against Terica and Alina Powell, who had attempted to declare Susan legally dead in order to collect life insurance. As a result, Chuck gained full control of the estate. In 2019, a surprising revelation came to light. KSL, a radio station in Salt Lake City, reported on its detailed podcast about Susan's case, called Cold, that disturbing child abuse material found by West Valley City Police, which contributed to Joshua losing custody of his sons, did not actually belong to him. In fact, it wasn't even found on his computer. The explicit images were located on a second-hand computer that Susan had bought from fellow members of her LDS church. The previous owners had viewed the content, but by the time this information surfaced, it was too late to rectify the situation. The damage had already been done. In early 2022, there was one final attempt to locate Susan's remains. A team led by Dave Sparks, known from the TV show Diesel Brothers, searched a remote mine shaft in the Utah desert in hopes of bringing Susan home. They discovered rib bones, what looked like human vertebrae, and pieces of clothing, indicating that someone had died there. The remains were sent for DNA testing, but once again, there was no success. The bones did not belong to Susan, and they were not even human. A pair of pants found with the remains tested positive for male DNA, raising another question: to whom did they belong? More importantly, will Susan Powell ever be found? Perry March was born in 1961 to Arthur March and Sephora. He and his wife, Janet, were complete opposites of each other. He is ordinary, but his wife was a very bright, beautiful woman, dreamy and talented. Janet grew up in a wealthy family, as the daughter of a well-known lawyer from Nashville. Janet and Perry met as students at the University of Michigan in the early 1980s and quickly became inseparable. When Perry graduated and moved to Chicago to work as a financial broker, Janet followed him without hesitation. However, she soon began to miss her home and family. To support Perry's education, her father agreed to pay for his expensive tuition at the prestigious Vanderbilt Law School. As a result, Janet and Perry returned to Nashville, and since Perry was hesitant, it was Janet who proposed to him in Percy Warner Park. They got married in 1987 and moved into a house in a well-known area of the city, which was rented and paid for by Janet's father. The following year, Perry graduated and chose to work for a local law firm in Nashville instead of accepting offers from large firms in New York. In 1990, Janet gave birth to a son named Samson, affectionately called Sammy. On the surface, this family seemed to have everything: a mother, a father, and a son. Unfortunately, this outward appearance of happiness was deceptive. In 1991, a scandal emerged at the law firm where Perry worked after a young female specialist received an inappropriate proposal from a colleague. A stranger sent her a letter expressing his attraction to her and his desire for an intimate relationship. Feeling embarrassed, the young woman reported the incident to her boss. After this, 2 more letters arrived, urging her to respond to the proposal by leaving a message in the firm's library. In response, the firm took measures to identify the sender of these inappropriate letters. They installed a CCTV camera in the library where she was supposed to leave her reply. When the man came to collect the letter, the firm's lawyers were shocked to discover that he was Perry March, the husband of Janet. Faced with evidence from the video, Perry refused to confess. The law firm gave him an ultimatum: resign or be fired. He chose to resign. This uncomfortable situation led to legal consequences, as the female employee who received the unwanted proposal sued Perry for financial compensation. He was ordered to pay her. To avoid a harassment claim, she requested $25,000, half of which Perry was to pay in monthly installments, while the remaining $12,500 was to be paid in a lump sum. This arrangement was made to keep his wife, Janet, from discovering the scandal. In 1994, Janet and Perry welcomed their second child, a lovely daughter named Sephora. As their family grew, they decided to build a larger home and purchased nearly 2 acres in the affluent suburb of Forest Hill. Over the next year, they worked on constructing their dream house, a $650,000 mansion designed in the French country style. Janet was very enthusiastic about the project and closely oversaw every stage of the construction. However, her demands were sometimes unreasonable, leading Perry to step in and help mediate between her and the construction team. Although the new house brought excitement, Janet and Perry's marriage was facing difficulties. Their relationship had been strained for several months, and they frequently attended therapy, both together and individually. At home, they rarely communicated. Perry was often away for at least 3 days a week, and their arguments escalated whenever he returned. A family therapist suggested they take a break from each other, but Janet was adamant about getting a divorce. In August 1996, a significant incident occurred that changed the course of Janet and Perry's relationship forever. Perry needed to pay the final installment to a woman at a law firm, but, due to financial issues, he sent her a letter requesting to postpone the payment until October. Unfortunately, Janet read the letter, which led to a heated argument between them. In the aftermath, Janet contacted her mother to arrange a meeting with a divorce lawyer. On August 15, 1996, Janet was scheduled to meet with the lawyer but never arrived at the office because she mysteriously disappeared that night. Perry claimed that Janet left voluntarily after their argument. He told the police that she expressed a desire to get some space to think but did not specify where she was going. He said that at around 8:30 p.m., Janet packed a suitcase, took her passport and $1,500 in cash, and left in her car. He also mentioned that she left him a list of tasks to complete before her return. After she left, he informed friends and family of her departure as he normally would. The next morning, Deneen Beard, the maid, came to clean the house and was surprised to find everything in order. However, Perry asked her to focus on her work and not to go into the children's room. Then a nanny named Ella Goldschmidt, who had previously arranged with Janet that her son would play with Sammy, arrived. After Deneen left, Ella noticed Sammy jumping on an oriental rug that was rolled up on the floor next to the playroom. When she returned around 2 p.m. to pick up her son, the rug was no longer there. Initially, Janet's family believed Perry's explanation. Janet's father went to Nashville International Airport to check if Janet had left her car there. Janet's mother, Carolyn, became increasingly worried, as her daughter would not just vanish without a word and would never abandon her children. Although Carolyn wanted to contact the police, Perry convinced her to wait 12 days, claiming that Janet had said she would return by then. That evening, Perry called his father, Arthur, a retired U.S. Army lieutenant colonel living in Jalisco, Mexico. Arthur readily agreed to travel to Nashville to support his son during this challenging time. In the meantime, Janet's family's concerns continued to escalate. With August 25th being Sammy's 6th birthday, fears grew that something had happened to Janet. She would definitely not miss such an important occasion. While Perry and Janet's parents told the party guests she had traveled to California to visit her brother and was postponing her return due to an ear infection, her sudden disappearance raised alarm among her loved ones. Days passed without any news from Janet, and the anxious waiting could not go on much longer. On August 29th, Janet's parents reported her missing to the police. Detective David Miller, a skilled investigator with extensive experience, was assigned to the case. He initiated the investigation by reaching out to hospitals and reviewing Janet's bank and credit card accounts, which had not been used since her disappearance, raising concerns about her well-being. On September 7th, authorities located Janet's car in a parking lot at an apartment complex about 5 miles from her home. The car appeared to have been parked there for several weeks. Inside, police discovered Janet's bag, which contained her documents, passport, credit cards, and $11 in cash. They also found a suitcase filled with clothes, notably absent of a bra, toothpaste, a comb, or underwear, which seemed unusual. Additional evidence included a pair of white sandals in the glove compartment and unusual, dirty bicycle tire tracks near the car. Investigators needed to analyze this evidence carefully. On September 10, 1996, Perry was questioned by investigators and consented to a search of his home. The police conducted the search over the weekend of September 14th to 15th while Perry was away in Chicago with his children. The house showed no signs of domestic violence or anything noteworthy. A few days later, the owner of a tire store contacted law enforcement to inform them that Perry had visited the store on August 21st, a week after Janet went missing. Perry inquired about purchasing a new set of tires, despite the good condition of those already on his car. When asked why he wanted a different brand, his response raised further suspicions. On September 18th, Perry decided to move to Chicago with his children. Before leaving, he had a concerning conversation with Janet's longtime friend, Diane Sachs, which she later reported to the police. Perry asked Diane if she thought he could kill his wife. Although she hesitated to answer, he proceeded to ask the disturbing question of what she would think if he had loaded Janet's body into his car and taken it to a remote location for disposal. This raised serious suspicions about him. As a result, the police launched a comprehensive search for Janet, involving divers, 2 helicopters with thermal scanners, specially trained dogs, police officers, and volunteers. Meanwhile, Perry hired a lawyer, who informed the police that Perry would not cooperate with the investigation. In November, as Janet's parents held a day of mourning for her, Perry chose not to attend, further increasing the police's suspicions about him. Over time, a theory about Janet's disappearance began to develop. It was suggested that Perry and Janet had a heated argument the night she disappeared. During this argument, Janet may have said something that provoked Perry, leading him to strike her hard. Given that Perry held a black belt in martial arts, a single blow could have killed her, or he might have strangled her. Whether intentional or not, when he found Janet dead at his feet, he was faced with a dire decision. Investigators believe that Perry hid Janet's body either in the basement, in the woods, or near their home. Furthermore, Ella had mentioned that there was a rolled-up rug that she had noticed in Perry's house that morning. Janet's body may have been inside that carpet, and tragically, little Sammy may have unknowingly played around his mother's body. Afterward, Perry moved her body to his Jeep and drove to a location where he buried it. He then drove Janet's car to where it was later discovered, taking her mountain bike with him so he could ride it back home. However, these are merely speculations, and the police were tasked with uncovering evidence of the murder, marking a new phase in the investigation. Janet's father, a prominent lawyer, was determined to uncover the truth about his daughter's disappearance. Meanwhile, Perry applied to become the manager of Janet's estate, but her parents opposed this and filed their own petition. Perry refused to consent. Ultimately, the court designated a guardian to oversee Janet's property and ordered Perry to return some items he had taken. He only returned them after being urged to do so. This was just the beginning of a legal dispute between Perry and Janet's parents. The battle continued until late 1999 when the court granted Janet's parents the right to visit their grandchildren. They traveled to Perry's new home in Illinois, eager to see the children, but were shocked to discover that he had moved to Mexico to be with his father. Moreover, just weeks after relocating, Perry married a local woman named Carmen Rojas. 3 years had passed since Janet went missing, and she still had not been officially declared dead. This prompted her parents to file a lawsuit against Perry for the manslaughter of their daughter. When Perry did not appear in court to contest the charges against him, the judge ordered him to pay $113.5 million in compensation to Janet's parents in May 2000. Janet's parents traveled back to Mexico to confront Perry and requested to meet his children. He firmly refused their request, prompting them to return to Nashville. A month later, they returned to Mexico with a court order and assistance from local police, who arrested Perry for violating his visa. Although the charges were eventually dropped, by the time Perry got back home, his children were missing. Taking advantage of Perry's absence, Janet's parents took the children to the U.S. and sought permanent custody once they were home. This led to a direct confrontation and sparked another legal battle for custody. Ultimately, Perry regained custody, and Janet's parents were reprimanded for unlawfully taking the children. Later, the Tennessee Court of Appeals overturned Perry's manslaughter conviction. At this point, Perry believed he could lead a stable life in Mexico with his new wife and children, feeling confident that nothing would disrupt his plans. However, unexpected developments were on the horizon, as the local police department, along with 2 investigators, continued to actively investigate Janet's case. In the latter half of 2004, the prosecutor's office introduced new evidence that led to a retrial, during which 59 witnesses were heard. This resulted in charges against Perry for second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. In October 2005, an arrest warrant and a request for extradition to the United States were issued for Perry. While being transported, Perry was accompanied by Pat Postiglione, one of the detectives involved in the investigation. During the journey, Perry was quite talkative and asked the detective whether he could face murder charges if an accident occurred. He also told Pat that he would be willing to confess everything if he could receive a sentence of no more than 7 years. The detective stated that he would pass this information on to the district attorney. Janet's parents were determined not to allow Perry to enjoy a new life after spending a short time in prison. They submitted a new petition for custody of the children, which the judge approved. Facing difficulties in the legal system, Perry sought another solution. He attempted to persuade his cellmate, Russell Ferris, to kill Janet's parents. Russell became interested in the plan and learned that Perry's father, Arthur, would act as the intermediary. After 2 months of discussions among the three, Russell's lawyer notified the police about Perry's offer to kill Janet's parents. From that point on, Perry's situation became increasingly complicated. Initially, the evidence against Perry for murder was weak and mostly circumstantial. His lawyer argued that there was no solid proof that Perry had committed the crime. If he had been found not guilty, he could not be tried again for the same offense. However, the situation changed dramatically with the discovery of a murder-for-hire plot involving Janet's parents. Now, the police had recorded conversations revealing details of the planned murder, including statements made by both Perry and his father, Arthur. When Arthur listened to the recordings, He realized his errors and agreed to testify against his son in exchange for a more lenient sentence. The disturbing truth emerged. Arthur, Perry's father, revealed that his son had confessed to him about killing Janet. A few weeks after the murder, Perry sought his father's help because he was anxious about the body being discovered. He asked Arthur to help hide it. One night, they drove to a location where, according to Arthur, the body was already decomposing and stored in a bag. Arthur recounted loading the remains into Perry's Jeep. They then traveled north to Bowling Green, Kentucky, where they stayed at a motel. Under the cover of darkness, Arthur attempted to dispose of the body. He looked for a body of water deep enough to conceal the remains but was unable to find one before sunrise. Eventually, he located a suitable spot. Arthur later attempted to guide investigators to the location where he had hidden the body, but he couldn't specify the exact spot. However, both the police and the jury believed his account of the incident. According to Arthur, after Perry killed Janet, her body remained in their home for some time, wrapped in a rug. Unfortunately for Arthur, his confession did not yield the leniency he had hoped for, and he died just months later while incarcerated. Perry faced a much harsher fate. He was convicted of second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse, theft, and conspiracy to commit murder, resulting in a 56-year prison sentence. He is currently incarcerated at the Morgan County Correctional Complex, where he assists fellow inmates with their legal appeals in the prison law library. He will be eligible for parole in 2038. Tragically, Janet's remains have never been found. Zoe Gabrielle Campos was born in September 1995 in Lubbock, Texas. She was the youngest daughter of her parents, Melinda and Alejandro Campos III. She had an older sister, Savannah. Their father served in the Navy infantry, which caused the family to move frequently, but after a few years, they eventually returned to Lubbock. Melinda and Alejandro eventually divorced. While growing up, Zoe had many different hobbies, but most of all, she loved animals. Zoe's mother said that the girl often brought home stray animals. She has a kind heart, wants to help all animals, especially dogs, cats, and turtles. Zoe was very close to her mother from a young age. Her mother mentioned that people often joked about how Zoe and she had forgotten to cut the umbilical cord. Zoe was an incredible daughter, sister, and friend. She was cheerful, funny, but very caring. Zoe was also interested in mechanics and spent her free time repairing cars. Shortly before her disappearance, she started working on an old car that she hoped to restore herself. Her mother said that if Zoe could open a pet store next to an auto repair shop, she would definitely do it. Zoe had a wonderful relationship with her sister Savannah, and they spent a lot of time together. Savannah had 2 children, and Zoe loved being an aunt. She enjoyed taking her nephew fishing at a lake not far from their home. Despite being only 18 years old, Zoe was very mature and extremely responsible. She didn't go out partying, preferred the silence and cozy atmosphere at home. Unfortunately, all of this was taken away from her. On November 17, 2013, Zoe spent most of the day with her family. Later that evening, she planned to go to her friend April's house, where a baby had just been born, and April invited her closest friends to celebrate the occasion. It was not a big party, but rather a small gathering of friends, and of course, everyone there knew April. However, not all the guests knew each other. It was a normal evening. Everyone was chatting, and a friend mentioned that Zoe left around 9 p.m. because she planned to go to dinner with her sister Savannah. They intended to spend the evening with another friend. Savannah later reported that during dinner, Zoe was as carefree as ever. After dinner, everyone went to watch a movie. When the sisters returned home, Zoe planned to spend the night at Savannah's house to take care of her nephew and niece the next day while Savannah was at work. Savannah stated that the movie ended at 11:30 p.m., and during the film, Zoe seemed to fall asleep. When they got home, Savannah went to her room, thinking that Zoe would sleep on a couch in the living room, unaware that the next morning, her sister would be gone. Zoe left the house later that night when Savannah went to bed, which was out of character for her. It is known that Zoe left home at night from an emergency message her mother received at 2:30 a.m. Melinda worked at a bar that closed around that time, and she was pleasantly surprised when she got a message from her daughter, asking for a ride home. Melinda waited for about 30 minutes, but Zoe never showed up. Initially, Melinda was not too troubled and tried to call her daughter, but Zoe didn't answer. Melinda thought that maybe Zoe had simply fallen asleep. Melinda reached a friend's house near the bar and stayed there overnight, planning to return home in the morning. On November 18th, Zoe's sister woke up and began getting ready for work. Seeing that Zoe was not on the couch and not in the house, Savannah immediately started calling her. When Zoe didn't answer and her car wasn't parked outside, Savannah thought Zoe might have gone home early. She called again, but each time, the call went straight to voicemail. Savannah then contacted her mother and realized that she also couldn't reach Zoe. Panic ensued. Savannah and Melinda started calling hospitals to see if perhaps Zoe had been in an accident. However, after several hours without contact or any information, the women finally reported Zoe's disappearance to the police at around 5 p.m. The police could only accept a missing persons report after 24 hours. Fortunately, they agreed to send out a profile of Zoe's car and attempted to contact her mobile service provider. They were informed that Zoe's phone was either turned off or the battery had been removed. Then, a surprising coincidence occurred. Zoe's aunt, Monica Rivas, was driving through the city on November 20th when she spotted her niece's gray Lincoln car near the university on 62nd Street. Monica immediately followed the car, trying to see the driver, but found it difficult due to the tinted windows and the car's speed. Still, she managed to determine that the driver was a man dressed in a hoodie with a darker complexion, and he appeared to be about 20 years old. As Monica followed the car, a lot of questions raced through her mind. Was Zoe in the car? Had this person harmed her? These thoughts nearly overwhelmed her, so she decided to focus on following the car while calling her son to explain the situation. However, the driver of the pursued car seemed to realize he was being followed and tried to escape. Eventually, Monica lost sight of the car when it turned sharply south, but she persisted in her search. When her son joined her, they found the Lincoln parked near Zoe's apartment. Monica immediately called the police and had to wait about an hour for the officers to arrive. Unfortunately, Zoe was not in the car, and she remained listed as missing. After inspecting the car, the police discovered several items: a phone charger, a black jacket, a sweatshirt, and some duct tape. They collected all of these items as evidence and lifted fingerprints from the vehicle. Since Zoe's father was an active member of the Marine Corps, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service became involved in assisting with the investigation. They took the jacket for forensic examination to look for any traces that could lead them to Zoe. The investigators also needed to find out if anyone had seen her on November 17th from 11:30 p.m. onward. Based on her latest text messages, mobile phone operators helped to estimate her approximate location, which indicated that she had been within a 1-mile radius of Lowry Field, a local football field. This area had a reputation for crime and other societal issues, which surprised Zoe's friends and family. Zoe did not use illegal substances and had no involvement in what is known as human trafficking, raising their concerns about the location where she was last seen. The investigators tried to speak with everyone who had been at April's house the night Zoe went missing, hoping someone might have heard or seen something unusual regarding Zoe's behavior or conversations. They discovered that a man named Carlos Rodriguez attended the party. When questioned on November 25th, Carlos claimed he did not know Zoe before they met at April's but mentioned they had conversed briefly. He stated that they left at almost the same time, but the investigators found something odd in his story. Something felt insincere. As a result, Carlos was called in for additional questioning on December 9th. During this session, the investigators received significantly different information. Carlos admitted he had lied earlier, that he and Zoe communicated on Facebook after leaving April's. He said they had agreed to meet at his house that night to chat, but he continued to deny any involvement in Zoe's disappearance. He claimed she had come over, they intended to smoke marijuana, but when they had none, so Zoe left to find some and never returned. Carlos explained his initial deceit was due to not wanting to get in trouble over banned substance. However, he became the primary suspect in the case. Given that he had lied previously, investigators wondered if he was telling the complete truth this time. It turned out that his house was within a 1-mile radius of Lowry Field. In 2014, Zoe's family hired their own investigator to pursue any leads they came across, and they received numerous messages from community members eager to assist in the investigation. The investigators insisted that Carlos knew more than he disclosed. Eventually, they obtained a search warrant and investigated his residence. The police dogs brought and found several traces of Zoe's scent in that house and in the alley. The police conducted thorough searches of the premises but found no additional evidence. Over the course of 2015 and 2016, the entire community aided in the search, spreading awareness by posting flyers featuring photos of Zoe in hopes that someone might remember her or provide clues. As the years passed, Zoe's family and loved ones clung to hope for her safe return. On November 16, 2016, relatives and community members held a candlelight vigil to honor Zoe, who had gone missing 3 years prior. Over the years, investigators continued to seek the truth from Carlos. He was repeatedly called in for questioning, yet each time, his account of meeting Zoe evolved. However, when investigators found DNA on Carlos's jacket, he had to admit that Zoe had been in his house and in his room for some time. That night, Carlos was interrogated at the Lubbock County Detention Center. During investigations into Carlos, it was revealed that he had been stalking his ex-girlfriend, who said Carlos had threatened her with violence on several occasions. At that point, investigators were sure there was more to his story, but they needed concrete evidence before they could request another warrant. Then, another inmate, who was serving time with Carlos, mentioned in a conversation about the search that was being conducted at Carlos's house that, "The police have searched, the body will not be found until the concrete is removed." This statement was later confirmed by an informant who, on July 31, 2018, contacted detectives to tell them that Carlos had confessed to him where he hid Zoe's body. The informant provided specific details from Carlos's words about where the body could be found, which was enough to obtain another search warrant. In November 2018, the same team of police officers, accompanied by service dogs, went to conduct a search in the backyard. The dogs alerted the police, and they began digging in that area. Eventually, they discovered a set of bones. The bones were sent for examination, but before determining whose they were, there was no certainty that they were human remains. Carlos was called in for questioning, and in the middle of the interrogation, when the bones were mentioned, he fell silent, refused to talk until he was granted access to a lawyer. The lab results came quickly, revealing that the bones were not Zoe's, but rather animal bones. Investigators decided not to inform Carlos of this, as his reaction when the bones were mentioned suggested that the investigation was close to solving Zoe's case. In the following days, Carlos was closely watched, as were those he communicated with. After monitoring some of his conversations, investigators realized that Carlos genuinely believed they had found Zoe's remains. On November 14, the police used ground-penetrating radar to identify additional areas to dig. However, before digging commenced, Carlos requested to speak with the lead detective. During this meeting, Carlos gave a full confession. He explained that on the night he and Zoe were together, they decided to use an illegal substance. After taking it, he went crazy, hit Zoe hard in the face, put her in a chokehold, and took her life. Carlos claimed that he buried Zoe that night in his backyard and later relocated her body to a deeper grave. Investigators took Carlos to the residence where he showed them the location of Zoe's remains. Just after 10 p.m. on November 16, 2018, Zoe's decomposed remains were found. Carlos was arrested and charged with her murder. The arrest warrant stated that Carlos Rodriguez confessed to killing Zoe in the house in which he committed the crime early in the morning of November 18, 2013. Zoe's remains were sent for forensic examination. Since much time had passed and the body had decomposed, they had to use dental records to confirm the identity of the remains. Zoe's father explained that when he sat down with relatives and told them that the body belonged to Zoe, everyone felt some relief, knowing that Zoe was not lost or suffering, and while this part of the tragedy was over, the pain remained. Despite Carlos's full admission of guilt, he later maintained in court that he was innocent. He also published a letter intended for the media in which he reiterated his claim of innocence, stating that he and Zoe had met at April's house for the first time and that they had shared some flirtation. Carlos claimed that when he sent Zoe a message on Facebook late at night, they agreed to talk at his house. He stated that during the conversation, his mind, clouded by the substance, distorted reality, leading him to perceive Zoe as having an evil grin before he struck her. He said he did not remember how he managed to catch up to her, and that he regretted the actions he took, having lived for 5 years with guilt over the murder. Carlos apologized to Zoe's family in his letter, asking them to forgive him and encouraging them not to succumb to hatred. He also claimed he had to bury Zoe's body after it began to be unearthed by dogs. He and his lawyers prepared for trial, arguing that his original confession had been coerced because he had not been represented by a lawyer at the time. However, the judge ruled that both Carlos's oral and written confessions were legally obtained, could be used in court. On August 15, 2022, Carlos changed his plea from not guilty to an open plea, meaning he did not make a deal with prosecutors but planned to use his chances in court. He faced a minimum sentence of 5 years and a maximum of life imprisonment. After a brief deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict on August 18, sentencing Carlos Rodriguez to life imprisonment for the murder of Zoe Campos. Calgary, Canada, nicknamed Cowtown, is a sprawling cosmopolitan community that grew rich from its role in the Canadian oil industry. Although Calgary is both cutting-edge and modern, it is also Canada's #1 rodeo destination, and its deep-rooted agricultural history is where the name Cowtown originates. It is here, in the quiet southeastern suburb of Ogden, that we meet Lisa Mitchell. Lisa was born in 1981, and she was one of 2 sisters. While the girls were growing up, their mother, Peggy, took care of them both. She loved her daughters very much but also taught them to be independent. When Lisa was 4 years old, Peggy could already tell that her daughter would be unique. The girl was sociable, expressed her creativity through art and music. In high school, Lisa made many friends with whom she eventually formed a girl group. She graduated from high school with average grades but excelled in creative subjects such as art and music. After finishing school, Lisa held various positions at grocery stores and cafes, but above all, she wanted to work at various events, including concerts. This would give Lisa the opportunity to meet some of her favorite musicians. Soon, Lisa got a job at a private restaurant located in northeast Calgary. She liked the work and enjoyed the food there, but one of the sushi chefs particularly appreciated her presence. This man's name was Alan Schieback. Although Alan was actually shy and reserved, he managed to start a conversation with Lisa. From that moment, they began to grow closer. Initially, their relationship was happy, but there were also problems. Lisa's parents did not like Alan because they thought he spoiled her mood. Lisa was always a sociable, cheerful young girl who loved to take risks and express her emotions. In contrast, Alan was much more reserved, calculating, and suspicious of anything. Eventually, these differences created cracks in their relationship, and the situation became tense. After 5 years of living together, they eventually separated. Lisa started dating other men again, and although it seemed she had forgotten Alan, he could not say the same. Alan found it difficult to move on after their breakup, and so a few months later, he reappeared in Lisa's life, begging for a second chance. Lisa tried to forget him while dating again, but none of the men she met fulfilled her desires. So, when Alan presented her with an engagement ring right before her eyes, their relationship resumed quickly. However, despite the engagement, the quarrels also resumed. They decided to start a family. First, they had a son, and after 2 years, a daughter arrived. They tried their best to make their children happy, but they themselves had a hard time. Alan worked during the day while Lisa stayed home with the children, and in the evenings, after dinner, the spouses would switch places. This way of life began to strain them both. Fatigue accumulated, and the changing work schedules took away the time that they could spend together. Often, the time they did find led to arguments, which became increasingly heated and fierce, eventually escalating into physical confrontations. Alan and Lisa went so far as to pinch, slap each other. After 10 years of marriage and 2 children, they both felt they had no other choice but to try to improve their relationship. It seemed better to break up and seek new happiness. Lisa's wise mother thought the same. She often urged her daughter to end things with Alan and return home, where she would always be there to offer her support. In recent years, Lisa and Peggy had become very close, not only in relationship but also due to distance. In 2011, when Lisa got a second job at the Longview Hotel, only an hour's drive from her mother's house, the reason was that Alan had lost his job again, and Lisa often had to work overtime to make ends meet. This, of course, caused tension between the spouses. While Alan often stayed home with the kids, Lisa frequently stayed with her mother to have time and perhaps take a break from Alan. In October, at the hotel, there was an event in honor of Halloween, and Lisa was among the invitees. She agreed to go, taking her mother with her. Since Lisa had worked the next day, she decided to spend the night at her mother's house. They had a great time at the party, and everything went smoothly. The next morning, on October 29, 2012, Peggy hugged her daughter before taking her to work, but from that moment on, everything would change. Despite sending numerous messages, Peggy did not receive a response from Lisa for several days, which was unusual since Lisa always replied promptly. After checking on some information, Peggy found out that Lisa had stopped showing up at work. After that day, calls to Lisa and her family went unanswered. No one read her messages. Peggy began to worry seriously and decided to visit the Shyback residence. As she approached the front door, she knocked, not knowing who would answer. Later, Peggy said that Alan opened the door, and the first question she asked was, "Where is Lisa?" Alan replied that Lisa had left him. He claimed she ran away on Monday after an argument. He said that after they seemed to calm down, Lisa had sent him to buy cigarettes, and when he returned after 15 to 20 minutes, she was no longer at home. The conversation took place in the hallway. Looking to the right, Peggy noticed that Lisa's shoes and favorite jacket were still in the house. Since it was October, Peggy wondered where Lisa could have gone without dressing properly. She then told Alan that she wanted to see the rest of the house. As she walked through, she noted several of her daughter's personal belongings. However, she did not find Lisa's handbag, but she noticed that the jewelry Lisa always wore was still in its place. Lisa was nowhere to be found. Alan then claimed that after Lisa left, she had sent him an email. He asked Peggy to check her inbox, and indeed Lisa had written a letter to her mother. In this letter, she expressed how unhappy she was and that she needed to leave to clear her head. She wrote that they would soon contact each other more than once. There was something very strange about these letters. They were very different from her usual letters and lacked warmth and filled feelings. This time was tormenting for Peggy. She slept every night next to the phone in case her daughter called. Then, at 4:45 a.m. on November 16th, a very strange voice message was received. Peggy could not remember it word for word, but she realized that Lisa was fine. At the end of the voice message, Lisa said, "He is at home, I have to go." Peggy was confused. Who is at home? Where to go? She wondered if there was someone next to Lisa controlling her or if she was chained in a basement. This mysterious message prompted Peggy to decide to contact the police and initiate an investigation into the disappearance of Lisa Mitchell. The police first questioned those who had last seen Lisa and also visited the house where she lived. However, they did not find anything unusual there. The house was clean and tidy, except for the basement, which, like all basements, was full of junk. Checking the bank history and phone activity was unsuccessful. Lisa had not called or sent messages, and her funds on the cards had not been used since her disappearance. The case was treated as a missing persons case, and progress was slow. However, after more than 1 year, 3 months after Lisa's disappearance, Alan was finally interviewed by authorities to learn more about his relationship with his wife. He revealed that his relationship with Lisa had been rocky for the past decade. Alan also stated that his wife had dated other men while they were still living together and that he had found her profile on several dating sites. The information Alan provided was helpful to the police, but he still remained a suspect. Alan said that he had not heard from Lisa for several months. There is an expression that when a person disappears, their silence can be the loudest thing imaginable. As the investigation into Lisa's disappearance was delayed, the authorities decided to take extreme measures. Very rarely do people voluntarily remain missing for so long, and the police understood this. In connection with the change in local privacy laws, the police received the right to search for missing persons and study accounts, phone records. They were able to analyze the voice message that Lisa left for her mother a year ago. The phone from which the voice message was sent was traced back to Alan's number. Interestingly, Alan told the police that he had not heard from Lisa since she disappeared in October 2012, changing the authorities' view of him. Now that the case had become a criminal investigation, investigators were allowed access to all of his information, including his bank records. What they found was disturbing. It was revealed that back in 2012, Alan had made a rather strange purchase. He had gone to a local hardware store to buy gloves, bleach, a large plastic tub, a body mat, road salt, a wooden board, and concrete, items that the police would call a burial kit. The officers were troubled by this, but despite this evidence, the authorities felt it was not enough to arrest Alan. They needed something more, perhaps a confession. Based on this idea, a project called Aurora was created. It was a special operation aimed at achieving an eventual confession, and there was no easier way than through friendship. On December 4, 2013, a Thursday with temperatures well below zero, visibility in the area was quite good. That is why it was a real shock for Alan when a young woman crashed into his car in the parking lot of his workplace. She approached him to apologize, stating that it was an accident and that she would be happy to share her contact details to sort out the insurance. At first, Alan seemed unhappy, but eventually, he accepted the offer. Unknown to Alan, the woman was actually an undercover police officer. She told Alan that her boss would pay for any damage. That boss was also an undercover officer. The operation officially began. Several undercover officers were involved in maintaining the artificial friendship between Alan and his new friend. For instance, some female officers pretended to be nannies. They managed to become friends with Alan, who became so close to some of these imaginary friends that he even invited them out for drinks and to events. As for the first female officer, he politely invited her on a date, to which she, of course, gently declined. All these police officers slowly but surely approached Alan and his secrets in the hope that over time, they would obtain some kind of confession from him. To their credit, they had all been working for about a year, and their efforts were finally rewarded in December 2014 when a breakthrough was made. Feeling confident that a strong enough connection had been established between them and Alan, a plan was enacted to elicit the long-awaited confession. One of the officers arranged a trip by train to Winnipeg, which is more than 130 miles from Alan's home. As they were driving in Alan's car, a phone rang. It was the officer calling from the station to inform Alan that the status of Lisa's case had changed. Authorities now believed they were dealing with a murder, and officers were coming to his residence to search the house. On December 5, 2014, almost all the details of Lisa's disappearance finally became known. Alan, who was riding in the car with an undercover officer, said that he was in trouble, without going into details. The officer offered to help Alan and his children disappear, putting Alan in touch with a man who promised to assist him. This man was also an undercover officer. While the meeting was taking place, the police were already conducting a search at Alan's place. Unfortunately, they soon made a tragic and horrifying discovery in the basement of the family home. In the farthest corner of the house, cluttered with all sorts of junk, police found the remains of Lisa, crudely cemented and buried with a plastic bag. Her body was covered in cat litter and salt, indicating that the body had not decomposed naturally. Lisa's remains were partially mummified. Unfortunately, Alan had killed his wife, the mother of his children, and then hidden her under the house, where he continued to live upstairs for 26 months with his 2 children. During his meeting with the undercover officer, who promised to help Alan disappear, he felt compelled to explain why he needed to hide. He said that he and Lisa had a difficult relationship. They argued and then tried to make peace. He could not even remember what the argument was about that evening. When they went to sleep separately, he saw that Lisa had come to his bed, and he did not know what she wanted. He raised his hand and began to strangle her. He remembered holding the body while Lisa was convulsing. He then thought he needed to send a few text messages and emails to make people believe she had voluntarily disappeared. Afterward, he cleaned the scene of Lisa's death with bleach 2 or 3 times to ensure that no trace was left. There are several details in this case that indicate Allen was not the smartest of criminals, but one of his plans to cover up the crime was quite complex. He faked a voicemail that was supposedly left for Peggy by Lisa, stitching together several of Lisa's calls using a special program installed on her phone. Police found Allen searching online for body decomposition, salt, lime, concrete, lack of air, insects, between December 2012 and 2014, along with searches for Lisa Mitchell and murder laws. All this evidence, combined with Allen's candid conversation with the undercover officer, was enough for the officers to finally arrest him. He was charged with second-degree murder of Lisa Mitchell. It took more than 3 years to bring a case against Allen. The authorities should have taken his mental health into account, as it became known that he suffered from bipolar disorder. There was also a possibility that Allen acted in self-defense, as he claimed. In September 2017, Allen was finally brought to trial for Lisa's murder. The judge did not believe he had acted in self-defense, as the force he used against Lisa far outweighed any defensive actions. On the other hand, the judge did not believe that Allen had intended to kill his wife. In the end, he was not found guilty of second-degree murder. Instead, he was found guilty of the lesser crime of manslaughter, along with the abuse of a body. Allen Scheibach was sentenced to a short term of 7 years behind bars, though this term was later increased to 10 years. During his sentence, Allen was granted parole and was free for only 1 day. He grossly violated the rules of his freedom, and an excessive amount of medication for bipolar disorder was found in his home. However, Allen did not have to serve the full 10-year sentence and was released early. He is now a free man but is not allowed to contact Peggy or his children. Although Allen did not serve much of a prison sentence for Lisa's murder, he was given a strange punishment after discovering that most of his friends were undercover cops. This truth was deeply heartbreaking for him, and he would likely struggle with his issues for much of his life. Lisa's children live with their grandmother. Peggy says that in her grandchildren, she sees a lot of her daughter and is happy to watch them grow up. She describes her grandchildren as bright, outgoing, and cheerful, just like their mother was. It's hard to say what happened the night Lisa was killed. Was it self-defense or cold-blooded murder? The only thing we can be sure of is that Lisa was taken from this world too early. Described as a bright soul and caring daughter, she was also a loving, hard-working mother who held 2 jobs so that her children would have warmth and food. Unfortunately, her death means that her children are now left without a mother or father. The case of Lisa Mitchell is not only a heartbreaking story of loss but also a reminder of the complexities of family relationships and the consequences of unresolved conflicts. Lisa's life, though cut short, was marked by her love for her children, her creativity, and her relentless optimism. Although Allen paid the price for his actions, that punishment cannot erase the pain that Lisa's family, especially her mother, Peggy, and her 2 children, have endured. Peggy now serves as a rock for her grandchildren, nurturing them with love and hope, just as Lisa did. The story ends on a sad note, but it also affirms that, although Lisa is no longer with us, her light continues to shine through the people she loved and the memories she left behind. Chris Benoit, born May 21, 1967, in Montreal, Canada, is a devoted family man. However, to the wrestling world, he was a formidable competitor and one of the sport's biggest stars. At 40 years old, he was actively involved in numerous matches. Known as the Rabid Wolverine, he particularly enjoyed a strong following in Canada, where he seemed to balance his intense wrestling persona with that of an ideal father. Wrestling legend Chris Jericho remarked, "Chris was always a great father and very focused on his family." Chris's life was demanding. Wrestling careers tend to be shorter than in many other professions, largely due to the dangers associated with the sport. Although the matches are scripted, the physical impact is huge. However, Chris and others try to fit in as many matches as possible during their short careers. He was constantly on the move, going from one wrestling event to another, and no matter the distance, he was always there to perform. This backdrop made the events of June 23, 2007, even more shocking. In the days leading up to the tragedy, Chris's behavior raised concern among his friends and family. Although he was accustomed to a demanding schedule with World Wrestling Entertainment, something seemed to have changed during those days. On June 22, 2007, he was scheduled to fly to a event in Houston, Texas, but he missed his flight, which was highly unusual for him. Chavo Guerrero, a close friend and fellow wrestler, was the first to sense that something was wrong. When Chavo finally contacted Chris, his voice sounded strange and disconnected. During their conversation, Chris expressed his affection for Chavo in an unusual way, raising concerns. He explained that his wife, Nancy, had been vomiting blood and their son, Daniel, was also seriously ill. This situation was worrying and seemed like a plausible reason for his absence. Chavo believed it was likely a temporary issue and hoped to reconnect with Chris when they met in Houston. However, the next day, Chris's behavior became even more alarming. He left a series of strange voicemails for Chavo, apologizing for missing the show and promising to catch the next flight to Houston. But the voicemails didn't sound like Chris, his tone was off, and he spoke in a somewhat erratic manner. He claimed he would arrive in Houston by 8 a.m., which didn't align with the timing needed for his flight. What had begun as a simple family emergency was quickly escalating into something concerning, prompting worries among others in the community that something terrible might happen. Chris also mentioned missing his flight and being late to the event in Beaumont, Texas, which was out of character for him, as he was known for always being punctual. He sounded tired and groggy and ended his message with an "I love you," which was not something Chris typically said to a colleague. This raised alarm bells. Initially, Chavo tried to dismiss it, thinking Chris was just overwhelmed with his family's health issues and the care they required, but he still felt that something was off. Just 12 minutes after receiving a voicemail, Chavo called Chris back but received no answer. He left a message asking Chris to return his call as soon as possible. At 3:44 p.m., Chris called back and explained that he missed Chavo's initial call because he was rescheduling his flight. Chavo felt uneasy and asked if something else was wrong. Chris dismissed his concerns, stating that he had a very stressful day and was worn out from his family's sudden illness. Chavo, however, doesn't believe Chris because he knows Chris enough to suspect that there's more to the story than meets the eye. He chose not to press further and suggested that they talk later after the fight, ending the call. At 3:51 a.m. on Sunday, June 24th, Chavo and their mutual friend, Scott Armstrong, received strange texts from Chris. One message included the address of Chris's family home, while another mentioned that his dogs were safely secured near the pool and that the garage door was still open. Although the text seemed odd, it was early in the morning, so they overlooked them, assuming Chris had made a mistake. A few hours later, Chavo was at Houston Airport waiting for Chris to arrive. On Monday, June 25, 2007, as WWE prepared for Raw in Corpus Christi, WWE Vice President of Talent Relations John Laurinaitis, aka Johnny Ace, reviewed the messages Scott and Chavo received from Chris early Sunday morning. The messages suggested that something was seriously wrong. After several hours without Chris showing up, WWE officials decided to call Fayetteville police for a welfare check on Chris and his family. By 4:15 p.m., they received alarming news. 3 bodies had been discovered in Chris's home, leading authorities to declare the scene a major crime scene. The bodies of Chris, his wife Nancy, and their son Daniel were discovered in various areas of the house, marking a tragic and horrific incident. On Friday, June 22, 2007, Chris killed his wife, Nancy, in the bonus room of their home in Fayetteville. Police later revealed that before her death, Nancy's arms had been tied with coaxial cables, and her feet were secured with duct tape. In the kitchen, they discovered a balled-up tube sock and tape that had dried blood on it, which authorities believed was used as a makeshift gag before her murder. Her body was found wrapped in a blanket next to a Bible. Evidence indicated that Chris had pressed his knee into her back while strangling her with a cord around her neck. There were no signs of a struggle prior to Nancy's death. Toxicology reports showed alcohol in her system, but it was unclear if she had consumed it before her death or if it was a result of decomposition. The condition of her body also complicated the determination of hydrocodone and alprazolam levels, raising the question of whether she had been sedated, similar to their son, Daniel, who was killed the next day, June 23, 2007. Daniel was Chris's third child and only son with Nancy. He was found suffocated, with another Bible next to him. Although there were no visible bruises, internal injuries to his throat confirmed the cause of death. Reports indicated that Daniel had been sedated with Xanax and was unconscious when he died. His body was decomposing, but not as severely as his mother's. Just hours before Chris ended his life on June 24, 2007, his internet searches raised serious concerns about his intentions. These searches indicate that he was not in a state of confusion but was preparing for something sinister. The last known photograph of Chris, taken on June 22, 2007, shows him at Dr. Phil Aston's office, just before the tragedy that would follow. Investigations later uncovered that Chris had searched for methods to break a neck, a troubling detail revealed by his former fiancée in a podcast in 2016. However, the Fayetteville County Sheriff's Office did not verify these specific searches, and Chris's autopsy showed no neck injuries. Additionally, there was a note, a final message found in a Bible next to the bodies of his wife and son, which simply stated that he was preparing to leave this earth. No one knew exactly what this meant, but it seemed like a final farewell, perhaps even a confession, as if Chris was trying to understand the actions he had just taken. The note was later sent to his first wife, Martina, and their 2 children in Canada. Chris's father, Michael, verified its existence, indicating that the tragedy might have been premeditated rather than a spontaneous act. The Bibles beside Nancy and Daniel added to the ominous atmosphere of the scene. Some interpreted the note as a sign of guilt, while others viewed it as Chris finally facing the reality of his actions. In his last days, Chris's life was plagued by darkness. Years of head injuries from wrestling had severely affected his brain, and the emotional burden of losing his close friend Eddie Guerrero plunged him deeper into despair. His mental health deteriorated, and the combination of physical and emotional challenges ultimately led to one of the most tragic events in wrestling history. He was found in his home gym, hanging from a pulley system with a towel around his neck. No one could have anticipated this outcome, especially following the horrific acts committed against his family. Toxicology reports on Chris revealed unusually high testosterone levels, suggesting steroid use. Additionally, traces of Xanax and hydrocodone were found, raising further questions about his state of mind. Was he under the influence when he killed Nancy and Daniel? While it's uncertain, it's clear that his mental health was unstable in his final days. Analyzing the crime scene, autopsies, and toxicology results indicates that this was a calculated crime. Chris spent days methodically killing his wife, his son, and ultimately himself. Steroids were discovered in Chris's home, hinting that roid rage may have influenced his actions. Some medical professionals link steroid use to significant anger issues and psychological problems like paranoia. Investigators noted a substantial time gap between Nancy's death and that of their son Daniel, suggesting that the murders were premeditated rather than impulsive. Prosecutors in New York began investigating Chris's orders from Signature Pharmacy and MedXLife.com, both of which sold steroids and HGH online. Terrence Kindlon, the lawyer for MedXLife co-owner Gary Brandwine, denied the claims that his client provided steroids to Chris. According to Sports Illustrated, Chris received 3 shipments from Signature Pharmacy, the first in December 2005 at a Texas address, the second in February 2006 in Peachtree City, Georgia, and the third in July 2006 in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. This investigation was part of a larger probe into steroid use among wrestlers, which implicated several individuals, including Kurt Angle, Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Edge, and Gregory Helms. Following the tragic deaths of the Chris family, there was a demand for answers, but each inquiry uncovered more questions. By the time authorities found the bodies of Nancy, Daniel, and Chris on June 25, 2007, some aspects of the case began to connect, but the overall picture remained unclear. The investigation was relatively simple. Chris killed his wife and son before ending his own life. However, something felt wrong about the scene. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle, making it disturbingly calm. Nancy's hands and feet were tied, and a Bible was found next to both her and Daniel. Was this indicative of Chris's mental breakdown, or was he trying to justify his actions in some twisted way? The toxicology report indicated high testosterone levels, confirming long-term steroid use, but it wasn't just the drugs at play. Chris's autopsy showed early signs of dementia and chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, indicating brain damage from years of head injuries. CTE affects behavior, causes mood swings, and can lead to aggression. Could this have been the crucial factor? Eddie, Chris's best friend, passed away 2 years prior, and many believe this loss significantly affected Chris. Eddie's death deeply impacted Chris, leading those close to him to report that he began to spiral downward. He became increasingly withdrawn and distant, showing signs of mental struggle. The combined emotional toll of losing a close friend and the physical repercussions of years in wrestling created immense pressure on him. This burden, along with other personal issues, likely contributed to his mental and emotional decline. Neuroscientist and former wrestler Christopher Nowinski suggests that Chris suffered from too many untreated concussions, which could have gradually harmed his mental well-being. Christopher noted that Chris was one of the few wrestlers who intentionally took chair shots to the back of his head, a reckless decision. After examining Chris's brain, Dr. Julian Bales, a neurosurgery expert at West Virginia University, found that Chris's brain showed such significant damage that it resembled that of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. Additional tests confirmed that Chris had severe chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a condition that can lead to serious behavioral problems. Chris's father later suggested that brain damage could be the main reason behind the tragic murder, but WWE dismissed this idea as mere speculation. In May 2003, Nancy filed for divorce, citing abuse from Chris, but she withdrew the filing 3 months later. In 2008, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported that Nancy might have suspected Chris of having an affair with a female WWE wrestler. There were also reports that they fought over a life insurance policy, based on information from the Fayette County Sheriff's Office. The reasons behind the Chris family tragedy are complex, and multiple theories have emerged to explain how things went so wrong. WWE Chairman Vince McMahon commented on the incident, suggesting that it stemmed from mental health issues combined with the physical toll of Chris's wrestling career. Vince believes that Chris's actions were not solely due to steroids, rather, they were influenced by the physical damage to his body and the emotional stress he was experiencing. While Vince's comments sparked debate, they highlight the significant effects wrestling can have on an individual's mental and physical well-being. It was evident that Chris was in distress, and this tragedy likely resulted from years of accumulated physical and emotional stress. An unusual detail emerged when a statement about Nancy's death was added to Chris Benoit's Wikipedia page just 14 hours before police found the bodies of Chris and his family. The update mentioned that Chris was replaced by Johnny Nitro for the ECW World Championship match at Vengeance because he was not there due to personal issues stemming from the death of his wife, Nancy. Wikinews noticed this update, which was later reported by Fox News. The edit took place at 4 a.m. on June 25, nearly 10.5 hours before the bodies were discovered at 2:30 p.m. that same day. Compounding the mystery, the IP address of the editor was traced back to Stamford, Connecticut, which was then the headquarters of WWE. When this early report reached the media, the anonymous editor claimed it was merely a coincidence. But was it really? Today, we will talk about a crime that became famous in the state of Tennessee, USA. Its victim became a household name, and an urban legend was formed about her. For many years, this story has been used to warn children. However, in reality, this story is full of lies and raises many questions. In February 1964, Paula Herring was 18 years old. The girl was a good student who had just entered the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Life seemed to be just beginning for her. Paula had been very athletic and had played basketball for many years. This not only made her strong physically but also mentally. These qualities helped her withstand the strong blows of fate. She had lost her father 3 years earlier. Paula had always been a daddy's girl, so her father's death was shocking. Her mother, Eva Herring, a widow, immersed herself in her work as a nurse and willingly formed numerous acquaintances with men. It seemed that she was not particularly affected by her husband's death. Paula sought solace in her loved ones, growing closer to her 6-year-old brother, Alan. The child did not understand what was happening and needed care. They often spent little time at home while their mother worked and went on regular dates. Their relationship was strained, and Paula planned to leave home as soon as an opportunity arose. The campus of the University of Tennessee turned out to be the best option to create distance. Paula and her mother communicated little, but Eva frequently asked for her daughter's help to watch Alan while she went out on dates. On Saturday, February 22, 1964, Eva left home with 2 men at around 7 p.m. and again asked Paula to babysit her younger brother. All of this happened despite Paula's plans to meet friends and go to a basketball game. She was forced to stay with her brother. She intended to put him to bed and read a book she had borrowed from a friend. At around 11 p.m., Eva returned home with 2 men. Eva immediately noticed that the front door was unlocked and felt anxious. Upon entering, they found Paula lying face down in a pool of her own blood. Her white shirt was stained with blood, and she showed no signs of life. It was clear that she had been brutally beaten and strangled. The probable cause of death was shots fired in her back, hitting her directly in the heart. The skirt of Paula was pulled up, suggesting abuse. While one of 2 friends rushed to call emergency services, Eva checked her daughter's pulse and, feeling faint from the sight, ran outside to catch her breath. Meanwhile, the men did not return to the house, opting instead to flee the crime scene. Eva realized that it was too late to help her daughter, but quickly regained her composure when she remembered that her son Alan was not with her. Fortunately, the boy was found in the next room, merely sleeping. When he heard the adults screaming, he came out to investigate. He explained that he and his sister had been watching TV that evening, then he went to bed early. Before that, he noticed his sister received a phone call while sitting in the living room. The next morning, news of the crime spread rapidly and appeared on the front pages of newspapers. The community was shocked, especially given the context of the corruption in America at that time. Her death was linked to a series of abuses of vagrancy recorded in the area in the previous months. However, the local residents believed that the crimes were committed at a much higher level. They were convinced that someone from a criminal contingent was taking advantage of the authorities' powerlessness, leading to increased murders. Consequently, citizens pressured law enforcement agencies to act. By Sunday morning, news of Paula's murder had made headlines. On Monday, a witness arrived at the station to report that a man named John Clark had bragged at a bar on the night of the murder that he intended to go to Eva's house, asserting that he would confront Eva if she answered his call. He planned to bring 6 cans of beer and stated he would wait for Eva if Paula did not join him. Thus, the police had a prime suspect. John Clark, nicknamed Red because of the color of his hair, was the son of a judge who was also the leader of the Republicans in the Senate. John was considered the black sheep of the family. His other siblings had achieved great success in life. Some worked for the CIA, some had built careers in the army, and others were involved in real estate. In contrast, John had been unemployed for the past year and a half. Many considered him a drunk and a loser. That same week, on Thursday, the mayor appeared on television during an official press conference, stating that the police were tracking the main suspect in the murder. However, he had not yet been arrested because there was no irrefutable evidence against him. Within an hour, the situation changed. After a meeting involving the prosecutor's office, detectives, and municipal representatives, suspicions were confirmed. By Friday morning, it was decided that there was enough evidence against the main suspect, and a warrant was issued for the arrest of John for first-degree murder and also for abuse. Following the trial, John Clark was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 30 years in prison. It may seem that the investigation proceeded too quickly, and indeed, this was the case. The incident involving Paula had become highly publicized, and authorities wanted to resolve it as swiftly as possible. After several decades, the armed forces finally began to ask key questions regarding a case that had seemingly been ignored at the time of the crime. However, it took more than 50 years to get closer to a solution. An impromptu investigation led a man named Michael Bishop to write a book about Paula's death, highlighting the story of how John Clark may have been framed. Bishop became interested in historical crimes committed in Nashville, an area so corrupt that there was more than enough material for investigation. Together with a friend, he started a project to catalog these interesting cases. He obtained a box of documents dated from the 1960s, which contained several folders labeled Paula Herring. He was amazed to find photographs from the sensational case that the police had conducted in those distant years, including crime scene photos and forensic reports from the morgue. The information indicated that Paula was the victim of a brutal murder, suffering from 3 gunshot wounds and 4 blunt force traumas to the head. She had been subjected to prolonged beating. Numerous defensive abrasions and bruises were found. Additionally, there were signs of strangulation on her neck. However, court documents only recorded 2 gunshot wounds. In this box, there was a note from Mr. Beverly Briley, who was actively involved in the case for reasons that appeared to stem from compassion, though the truth proved to be much more trivial. The processes and methods that the mayor used raised serious questions. Everything looked as if the interests of influential people were involved in this case. Michael began to delve into the circumstances of this tangled case. The closer he got to it, the more it resembled a web of lies. As it turned out, the then Mayor Beverly Briley was not just passively involved in the investigation of this crime, he played a significant role. It took time to understand his involvement. From the very beginning, he built his career on deception, starting with lies about his educational background, extending to his marital status and the existence of adult children, which he misrepresented to the Supreme Court. In truth, he was a notorious womanizer. Furthermore, rumors surrounded him regarding illegal substance use. These rumors arose because he periodically went to the hospital secretly, likely to deal with the effects of his systematic banned substance use without attracting media attention. While in a private clinic, he met 3 nurses. Gradually, these 3 women found themselves in an exclusive group they called the Drinking Club, which also included at least 2 detectives, the mayor, an assistant district attorney, and a sheriff. The exact number of members in this organization remained unknown, but it was clear that there were many more participants. They regularly met and used illegal substances. This is why Paula's mother and her friends became members of this organization. The nurses could obtain prescription drugs. However, there was immediate suspicion that this entire group might have been connected to the crime. Even Eva's interrogations raised questions. She doesn't give any direct answers. And one important point is that Paula was found after reading a book. Strangely enough, the book disappeared. But why would anyone take the book? Even more questions arose when Michael tried to understand why Paula had ended up in the house in Nashville that weekend. She was studying in college and lived on campus. In fact, she had an invitation from her boyfriend to go skiing, and her new friends from the sorority had invited her to a basketball game, where she was supposed to play the role of the team captain. It was strange that she chose to visit her mother, who essentially did not care about her. Even the request to babysit her brother, Alan, seemed odd, as the neighbors knew perfectly well that Eva was not particularly worried about him. She never used the services of a nanny. Most often, she simply left her son unattended for many hours, probably heading to her privileged club. Several witnesses described in detail the relationship between mother and daughter. All of them knew that it was strained. Eva's interrogations lasted about 6 hours, during which she provided very contradictory information. She left the police office on Saturday morning. By Monday, a witness came to the station and told the detectives about John Clark, the same person who allegedly went to Eva's house with beer and was supposed to have been the last to see Paula alive. In fact, the story of this witness was questionable. He was a guy from a wealthy family, unemployed, spent most of his time in pool clubs and bars. He had a dubious reputation as a habitual liar with addictions. Despite the doubts surrounding his story, he confirmed that John Clark owned a .32 caliber pistol, which matched the murder weapon. By around 6 p.m. on Monday, detectives arrived at John's location. He agreed to come in for questioning and even asked who could take him back home. Obviously, he did not consider the possibility of arrest. John had a reputation for drinking, but like many others involved in this story, he had good connections thanks to his father. John didn't really work anywhere. His family was supported by his wife, who worked as a school teacher. John was interrogated all night, and there were more than a few interrogators present. When asked to provide samples from under his fingernails to test for gunpowder, he refused, as he did with the polygraph test. He only agreed to a full-body search. Not a single scratch or bruise was found on him. In 1966, no DNA tests existed, making it impossible to identify the skin particles found under the victim's fingernails. John confirmed that he owned a .32 caliber pistol, but it had been either stolen or lost 10 days before he visited the police station. He claimed he didn't go to Eva's house that evening. Instead, he went to several bars from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., then returned home around 9:30 p.m. His wife confirmed he was home at that time. The police drove from the suspect's house to the crime scene, with travel time estimated between 14 and 24 minutes, depending on the route. According to the official conclusion, Paula was killed between 10 p.m. and 10:30 p.m., meaning John could have committed the crime. However, it was impossible to obtain a confession from the suspect, and there was no physical evidence linking John to the crime. The witness's story began to fall apart. The next morning, the witness received a call informing him that his story was not corroborated and that he would not receive a reward. He then presented new details to confirm his claims. He talked about a party where John's friends had challenged him to prove he had the guts to use a gun. John, a tipsy man, pulled out a gun and shot into the ground in front of the house. The witness provided an exact location, and they were able to recover the bullet. By coincidence, a book was also found in a ditch that Paula was supposed to have been reading on the night of the murder. It was strange that before this, dozens of law enforcement officers had failed to find it even on John's property. John admitted that the same morning he took his dark suit to the dry cleaners. When examined, experts found wool fibers identical to those on the floor where Paula was murdered. However, there was no blood on the clothes. An expert who later testified at the trial argued that it would take more than mere contact to transfer these fibers from the victim's clothes to John's suit. There had to be close, prolonged contact. Just a few hours after the bullet was sent for ballistics analysis, results confirmed it matched the bullets found at the crime scene. Yet, the law enforcement response was not straightforward. Originally, the bullet had not been found, but it was located the following morning in plain sight, raising suspicions that it had been planted. Neighbors recalled hearing a car quickly drive away from the crime scene, making a clanking sound. The book found in the ditch had no fingerprints at all, and even Michael herself expressed surprise at the speed of the tests, which took just a few hours along with the shipping of items. Such speed was simply stunning for the 1960s. At the pre-trial hearing, John's lawyer managed to get the abuse charge dropped because the medical examiner's report refuted it. They also succeeded in changing the venue, moving the trial to Jackson, Tennessee. The trial was scheduled for September, but before that period arrived, many events transpired, particularly involving several high-ranking police officers implicated in bribery, illegal activities related to selling in banned strip clubs and gambling halls. This likely reached even higher echelons of power, as the district attorney eventually refused to participate in some cases, including Paula's. These were handed over to his assistants, who were discovered to be members of the mayor's exclusive club. Both insisted on the death penalty for the defendant, but this was eventually cancelled. John was facing only life imprisonment. The judge decided that the trial would take 5 days. This decision seems strange given that the whole case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence. Not only were fingerprints missing, but even the murder weapon was absent. Some of the material evidence used by the prosecution seemed to have no relation to what happened during the case. The jury was isolated to prevent them from accessing information about the case from the outside. In fact, the judge, prosecutor, and lawyers seemed to be on the same team from the very beginning, so even the most absurd decisions met with no resistance. Naturally, under these circumstances, John had no chance. It was later discovered that the prosecutor was Eva Herring's former lover, and it turned out that her lawyer was also her lover. Interestingly, when John was summoned, he admitted that he had slept with Eva days before the murder of her daughter. John clearly remembered coming to his mistress's house with a gun. But he later forgot about the gun because he had been drinking that evening and simply forgot what happened. One day, Eva's husband was found dead. Curiously, shortly before these events, a life insurance policy had been issued. After receiving money for it, Eva bought a house where, 3 years later, her own daughter died. Since John was also her lover, it was obvious that she had dirt on him. The most controversial point was the number of gunshot wounds. Paula was actually wounded 3 times, 2 bullets that were discussed passed through her. One of them were found under her body on the floor, while the 3rd wound may not have been mentioned because it did not penetrate, and the bullet remained in her body. It was revealed that Paula's autopsy was not performed. In fact, the forensic experts stated that it was unnecessary since it was obvious she died from a couple of gunshot wounds that pierced her heart. However, it seemed that the autopsy was never conducted because the bullet found in her body could point to the real culprit of the crime and justify John. Strangely, Eva discovers her husband has died in similarly unclear circumstances, and his death is ruled to end one's own life due to a prescription drug overdose. Now it looked even more suspicious. Weren't there too many coincidences that one woman had 2 people die in her family under strange circumstances? According to Eva's confession, her husband left a suicide note, but for some reason, it was not mentioned anywhere. Eva claimed that she lost it. She stated that her husband had become depressed due to losing his job. She also suggested that the nurse had simpler access to prescription drugs than her husband. Which means Eva could have poisoned him, involving the highest echelons of power. Members of Eva's drinking club gathered, and naturally, this information did not appear at the trial. According to everyone more acquainted with the circumstances of the crime, Eva and her accomplices should have been in the dock in John's place, both for the murder of her daughter and for her husband's voluntary departure from life. After 5 days, as decided in advance, the hearings ended, and the jury went to deliberate the verdict. As expected, they found John Clark guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 30 years imprisonment. At that moment, the defendant lost consciousness and came to a few moments later, asking what had happened. Several appeals followed, and after the next one was filed, the same lawyer represented John. Despite his dissolute lifestyle and drunkenness, John himself seemed to be the most decent person among all the defendants in the case. Probably out of guilt, his lawyer became the only person from the entire group who was tormented by his conscience. Thanks to good renovation, John served only 9 years out of the required 30. His sentence was given in 1975, and he was released on parole. Later, he died insisting on his innocence. In January 1979, a series of pardons was initiated by the new mayor. He released 52 civil servants who had been jailed after numerous high-profile trials, including 20 convicted of murder. Subsequently, all these individuals became members of various political parties, and some even became FBI agents. During this period, the mayor himself was under investigation, particularly after an incident in 1977 when he fired a female chair of the council for refusing to release prisoners suspected of bribing officials. It was later revealed that the woman had been correct in her suspicions, but no action was taken against the mayor. He was eventually convicted of fraud, extortion for the purpose of selling liquor licenses, which led to a series of charges and scandalous convictions affecting police officers and high-ranking officials in Nashville. Among those implicated were exclusively addicts, corrupt officials, and criminals. A private club was uncovered, where nurses were found to have stolen prescription drugs from the hospital. Eva was fired from a private clinic due to her addiction to substances. The circumstances surrounding her daughter's death remain a mystery, as well as the voluntary departure of her husband from her life, are unknown. The participants and organizers took their secrets to the grave. More than half a century later, this history has been carefully concealed, and in Michael's book, most of the people who reported valuable information are listed as anonymous. They were still wary of the powerful individuals at the time of its writing, as many officials believed to be connected to this crime were still alive. Among Michael's informants were witnesses who provided detailed accounts of Eva. The informant said that Eva was raised in a Texas brothel, learned early on to use body as a means to influence people and obtain what she needed, including money, power. Notably, a few days before Paula's murder, Eva acquired 2 burial plots. According to the official conclusion, Paula was killed between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m., while her mother and her companions found her at 11 p.m. Her mother could not have known about her daughter's death at the time of purchasing the plots, leading to questions about whether it was mere coincidence. As far as is known, Paula was studying to be a lawyer. Due to a strained relationship with her mother, likely decided to expose her criminal activity. Paul suspected Eva might be involved in her father's death and collected incriminating evidence against her. Paul was aware of many unsavory details regarding influential people that could jeopardize her life. However, this is only one of the possible assumptions. The author of the book, Michael Bishop, himself is not entirely convinced of John Clark's innocence, as some evidence still points to him. After the investigation concluded, Eva returned to Texas with her son. Eva died in Texas at the age of 52, and her death certificate indicated a heart attack. However, those who knew her believed that her demise was related to alcoholism and substance abuse. 5 years later, the mayor of Briley died, and Eva's son Alan outlived them all. Alan often wondered why his father's suicide note was never found, what happened to his sister. Paula still lies in a lonely grave, with an empty plot of land beside her. Some believe that the second plot next to Paula was meant to be the final resting place for Alan, but something went wrong that night, and he survived. This case generated a lot of publicity, leading Eva Herring to involve her powerful lovers in the investigation, including the mayor, who found a convenient suspect in John Clark. However, this is merely a theory that can never be confirmed or refuted. The Paula Herring case remains one of Tennessee's most haunting mysteries, its legacy etched in an urban legend urging children to lock their doors. While John Clark's conviction appeared to close the chapter, Michael Bishop's investigation decades later exposed troubling gaps in the evidence, suggesting a rush to judgment possibly tainted by corruption. The truth about Paula's death, Eva's role, and the shadowy figures allegedly involved may never fully emerge, leaving only questions and a lingering sense of justice unserved. Paula's story endures as a cautionary tale, not just of crime, but of how lies and power can obscure the pursuit of truth. Kristina Joksimovic was named one of the most attractive women in Switzerland at the Miss Switzerland contest in 2007. 17 years later, the name Kristina is back in the spotlight, this time for the saddest and most tragic reasons. It all started with a phone call from her children's kindergarten. She did not come to pick them up at the end of the day. Naturally, her parents were very concerned about the sudden disappearance of their daughter, but her husband seemed not to be worried at all. Since less than 24 hours had passed since Kristina's disappearance, the authorities refused to intervene. Then, her father decided to take matters into his own hands and began searching the house. What he found was truly horrifying. Switzerland is one of the central mountain states of Europe, a country full of lakes, villages, and high alpine peaks. There are many ski resorts and hiking trails. If we drive about an hour north of Bern or an hour west of Zurich, we will find yourself in a city located right on the border with France and Germany, a cozy town called Basel. This is a wonderful place for walks, with Gothic cathedrals, red stone buildings, and the Rhine River, which flows through the city. To the southwest of Basel is a small commune called Binningen. It was on the night of February 13, 2024, that a terrifying discovery was made that shook the whole city. It all started the day before when the grandparents received a phone call from their granddaughter's kindergarten. Their daughter Christina, a former model and successful businesswoman, did not pick up her children after school. This was very strange because she loved her children and was always an extremely responsible mother. The situation became even more suspicious because the children's father also did not answer calls. The grandparents returned to Christina's family home, where they found Thomas, Christina's husband, but Christina was not there. The most surprising thing was that Thomas looked absolutely calm, as if nothing had happened. He said that he did not know where his wife was and offered her father a drink. For a few hours, he acted as if nothing had happened and looked quite cheerful. He spoke to Christina's parents as if it were a normal day, then said goodbye to the children, wished them good night, and sent them to bed. Her father was deeply concerned about the fate of his daughter. Instead of going home, he decided to thoroughly examine everything. Christina and Thomas lived in a prestigious house in Binningen. It was a rather large estate with many secluded corners and alleys, so it took Christina's father some time to go around all the rooms and then go outside. Eventually, he went down to the laundry room, which was in the basement of the house. This room was more like an isolated bunker with thick concrete walls and a steel door closing it. When he finally went inside, he noticed several large garbage bags lying in the corner of the room. From one of them, which made him horrified, blonde hair was sticking out. Unfortunately, in the bag was his daughter's head. Upon opening the bag and realizing what had happened, he ran out of the house screaming and calling for help. Soon after that, the police received the call from he reported that his daughter had been brutally murdered. It also became clear that her husband was most likely guilty of her death. Christina's career is one of the most interesting. Her path from one success to another inspires many. Although Christina was born and raised in Binningen and had lived most of her life there, she had Serbian roots thanks to her parents. When Christina became an adult in 2003, she won the Miss Northwest Switzerland contest, and in 2007 she entered the finals of the Miss Switzerland contest. In addition, she received other awards in this field. It is safe to say that she had classic beauty, but her talents were not limited to modeling. Her potential was revealed even more after she finished her career on the catwalk. As she grew older, Christina opened her own business, teaching other women how to walk in high-profile fashion shows and catwalk events. She helped Miss Switzerland contestants follow her example and also taught them how to walk confidently in their professional lives. Her Instagram page describes her as a high-heel expert, motivator, entrepreneur, and mother. Christina has conducted personal training with clients, hosted masterclasses on how to walk in high heels, and promoted confidence, femininity, and body positivity on her website. At the same time, Christina worked as an IT recruitment specialist while her business grew. In her personal life, Christina was a strong woman who dedicated herself to supporting and inspiring other women. In addition to her career as a model, entrepreneur, and consultant, she had two daughters, Vera, born in 2020, and Kira Sophie, born in 2021. Judging by the many photos on the internet, it is clear how much she loved her family. Christina was a kind and friendly person. She was distinguished by her devotion to her family. However, although many people have positive emotions about Christina, the same cannot be said about her husband. Many of her relatives viewed him as hot-tempered. For 3 years, he was a respected leader in the field of management changes in the Basel area, largely due to his father, who ensured his future as a millionaire and lawyer. On his LinkedIn page, Thomas described himself as a goal-driven entrepreneur. According to him, life is about people and their interactions. Judging by his posts, Thomas was an extremely boring person. His life seemed as monotonous. When they got married, their wedding was beautiful, held in a castle overlooking the hills and fields. After that, they had 2 wonderful daughters. Everything seemed perfect from the outside, or at least this is how it looked on social networks. On the internet, many photos where they look madly in love, picnics in the park, hugs on the floor, joint selfies at home. It seemed they had an ideal life, but the reality was far from simple. The truth is, Christina's friends were extremely unhappy with Thomas's behavior, especially in the last months before her death. One of her friends recalled that they had a crisis that lasted for several months. The police were even called to their house after the situation escalated into violence. Thomas was obsessed with their children, viewing them as an ideal project, and Christina, in his opinion, was only a hindrance. Thomas considered himself better than everyone else, which was especially evident on children's birthdays when he divided the guests into 2 sides, his family and hers, celebrating the holidays separately. One of Christina's ex-girlfriends told the prosecutor that Thomas had used serious violence against her on multiple occasions. Thomas's ex-partner had already testified against him, mentioning his terrible outbursts of anger. He once ran over her foot with a car and another time threatened to throw her out of the car on the way home. He allegedly grabbed her by the neck and forcefully pressed her against the wall during arguments. Thomas often lost control, which ended in punches or attempts to strangle her. As it turned out, Christina was not his first victim. While alive, Christina continued to post beautiful photos on social media, firmly believing that Thomas was the ideal husband who would never harm her. In old photos, she called him her support and proudly announced her second pregnancy. Just a few months before the tragedy, she shared a photo of her family with the caption, "My world." The irony is that it was Thomas who destroyed this world. Now, the evidence against Thomas speak for themselves. At the moment, Thomas initially claimed that he did not kill Christina. He stated that he found her in the laundry and, in a panic, dismembered her body. However, realizing that the evidence against him was too strong, he confessed to the murder. Although he tried to justify himself by claiming he acted in self-defense, asserting that Christina allegedly attacked him with a knife, forensic experts refuted this version. Based on the bruises on her neck, it became clear that she had been strangled. This was not all. An autopsy showed that Christina had been decapitated with a hacksaw, a knife, and garden shears. Thomas also dislocated her hip joints and then proceeded to dismember her body. The most disturbing detail was that Thomas cut out one organ, Christina's uterus, leading experts to suggest that he may have had ulterior motives. Additionally, he crushed it in a powerful hand blender and dissolved other parts of her body in a chemical solution. Those parts of her body that were not subjected to these 2 horrific methods showed signs of blunt trauma even before Christina's death, including cuts on her cheek, under her eyebrow and nose, bruises on her leg and foot, as well as on her shoulder blades and the back of her head. There was also evidence found on her head that strands of her hair had been pulled out. Most of these horrific acts were committed in the laundry room, as evidence and physical artifacts found at the crime scene showed. Thomas spent several hours over his wife's body before returning to his life as if nothing had happened. He even looked into her father's eyes, shared a drink with him, and assured him that Christina would return soon. After thoroughly searching the house, her father came upon his daughter's head, a discovery that one could hardly imagine. What exactly drove Thomas to murder his wife remains a mystery. Without the help of experts, one can only speculate and make too many assumptions. Nevertheless, we have a confession, and we know from her review that Christina planned to divorce Thomas. Perhaps this was what drove him to the brink of insanity. Surprisingly, after his arrest, Thomas tried to secure his release from custody through the court for compulsory measures in Basel. After being refused, he appealed to the cantonal court, where he was also denied. Finally, he appealed to the federal court, but there he was unlucky. According to the results of the investigation, it seems there are signs of a mental disorder. His attempts to hide his wife's death, then act like nothing happened in front of her father are evidence of sociopathy. without him showing a drop of emotion. The only question is whether he will be found guilty and what term he will receive. In Switzerland, the death penalty is prohibited. For murder, the minimum term is 10 years, extending up to life imprisonment. However, even a life sentence may allow for release after 15 years. Unfortunately, there is a possibility that Thomas will one day return to society. After being denied bail by the Swiss federal court in September 2024, Thomas remains in custody awaiting trial for the murder of Kristina Joksimovic. Prosecutors have concluded that Kristina was strangled to death, with bruises on her neck and body indicating severe violence before her death, rejecting Thomas's claim of self-defense that she attacked him with a knife. Forensic reports confirm that Kristina's body was dismembered in the laundry room with a chainsaw, a knife, and garden shears, and that some of her body parts were then chopped up with a hand blender and dissolved in a chemical solution. The trial has yet to begin, but prosecutors have described Thomas as displaying high criminal energy and sociopathic traits, with a history of domestic violence, including strangling Kristina. While awaits her verdict, Kristina is remembered as a strong woman whose legacy is her love for her two daughters and the people she inspired. In addition, Kristina's family is now forced to fight for custody of her children. Her parents and sister have banded together to provide the girls with a safe and loving home. However, Thomas's sister has also filed for custody, claiming that Kristina's parents are too overprotective. This has led to a major legal battle, with Thomas's sister supported by their millionaire father and his lawyers. It is a very difficult fight for Kristina's family. Thomas's actions should deprive him of any rights to the children. Kristina's children deserve to grow up in a home where they will not be asked about the truth of who their father was. Besides, the family has suffered too much pain and loss to also lose their grandchildren after the death of their daughter. Kristina was a strong, confident, and outstanding woman. She was always full of energy and new ideas, constantly supporting friends and family. Despite her boss-like energy, she was a caring and loving mother who was completely dedicated to her children. Now, these children will grow up without their amazing mother. 8 months after her death, their house is completely abandoned. The furniture may still be standing inside, but the house itself is dark and empty. On the grave, there are photographs, 2 crosses, small hearts made of stones, and drawings by her daughters. It is evident that many people miss her very much. Unfortunately, Kristina's story did not have the fair and bright end her fate deserved. Her strength, love, selflessness will live on in the memory of those who knew and loved her, as well as in her children, who will grow up knowing about the incredible woman who was their mother. However, life goes on. Despite the terrible losses, Kristina's family does not give up. There are people in this world who are ready to fight for light, for truth, and for the future of her children. On a summer evening in July 2011, Laura Jean Ackerson got into her car and drove toward Raleigh, North Carolina. She was going to pick up her kids from her ex, Grant Hayes. It was supposed to be a quick visit, just like many others before, but this time Laura didn't come back. At first, her friends weren't too worried. Maybe she got delayed, maybe her phone died. But when days went by with no word from her, they knew something was wrong. It seems like something terrible has happened. The police would later find an apartment that had a strong smell of bleach, items were missing, a strange letter appeared, and Grant and his new wife were suddenly on the move. So what really happened to Laura that night? Let's find out the truth behind it. Laura Ackerson entered the world on April 30, 1984, born to Roger and Brenda Ackerson. From the very beginning, Laura was a bright, lively child with a warm and vibrant spirit. She spent her early years attending Grace Fellowship Church with her family, where she quickly became known for her sweet nature and gentle heart. Everything changed for Laura in 1996. That year marked the collapse of what once seemed like a picture-perfect family. Her parents' constant fighting eventually led to divorce when Laura was just 12. The split hit her hard and left emotional scars that would linger. After the divorce, Brenda took Laura and moved to Iowa. Laura later pursued graphic design, drawn by a natural flair for creativity. She had an instinct for art, color composition, and visual storytelling. Eventually, Laura relocated to Kinston, North Carolina, hoping for a fresh beginning. There, she attended a real estate school. She found work in marketing and design. She also built a circle of close friends. Having moved around so much growing up, Laura had never had a stable friend group, so, finally, she felt like she belonged. In March 2007, while dining at a local restaurant, Laura met a man named Grant Hayes. Interestingly, they shared a birthday, April 30th. They sparked an immediate connection. Born in 1979 in Raleigh, Grant had a musical streak and a strong religious upbringing. He gained local recognition as a performer, playing small venues and bars. Years before meeting Laura, Grant had married a woman whom he'd fallen for soon after high school graduation. That relationship burned fast and bright, then fizzled out. Their divorce left a deep mark on Grant, who had written love songs inspired by her. With the end of that marriage came a decline in his mental health. He was later diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression. He prescribed powerful medications like lithium. But instead of sticking with treatment, Grant began self-medicating with alcohol and harder substances. As time passed, Grant's behavior grew more erratic. He dabbled in synthetic hallucinogens, which only amplified his worst traits: narcissism, paranoia, and aggression. He started having bizarre delusions, believing aliens controlled the government and that he was a chosen one destined to survive the apocalypse by finding a spaceship. He even rejected modern medicine, including vaccines, convinced they were harmful. Despite his deteriorating mental state, Grant's music career was still afloat. He was booking regular gigs, and that's around the time Laura came into his life. To outsiders, Grant might have looked like a rising star, but behind closed doors, his relationship with Laura quickly became toxic. He was controlling, physically and emotionally abusive. Worst of all, he is chronically unfaithful. Laura, already emotionally fragile from her childhood, struggled to break free. He isolated her from her friends and dictated nearly every part of her life, from her social circle to her daily routine. Shockingly, they tied the knot just months after meeting. Laura, longing for stability and love after years of emotional turmoil, believed she had found her fairy tale ending. But her friends were blindsided by the news. None of them even knew she was in a relationship, let alone married. Still, they stood by her, hoping she had made the right choice. Shortly thereafter, Laura discovered she was pregnant. She felt immense joy, imagining the new journey ahead as a mother. Grant, on the other hand, wasn't thrilled. The news only intensified his possessiveness. When their son, Grant Jr., was born, Laura poured every bit of love she had into him. Naming the baby after himself seemed like a classic move from Grant, not necessarily a sentimental one, but more a display of ego. Laura adored her son. Meanwhile, Grant was still chasing gigs, cheating, and indulging in banned substance, showing little interest in fatherhood. Eventually, he was offered a job in the Virgin Islands. He took it without hesitation, leaving Laura and their newborn behind in North Carolina. Whether or not he was actually working there is unclear, but one thing's for sure, he wasn't alone. Grant began seeing a woman named Amanda Perry, a single mother and aspiring actress. Amanda had scored small, uncredited roles in shows like The Sopranos and The Stepford Wives, but her career hadn't taken off. That's where another chapter in this tangled story begins. Grant was instantly drawn to Amanda, and not just because of her charm. Amanda had money, nearly $200,000 in cash and $80,000 worth of jewelry, possibly from her previous divorce, though that's never been confirmed. At the time Grant met her, he was flat broke, no savings, no stability. Amanda had resources, and that changed everything for him. Their relationship progressed quickly. For Grant, being with Amanda was more than romance, it was leverage. He flaunted the affair, making no effort to hide it from Laura. In fact, he used it as a weapon, taunting her at every opportunity. After years of enduring his manipulation, betrayal, and cruelty, Laura finally stood up, said she was leaving him for good. Surprisingly, even people close to Grant supported her decision. His own family, along with his ex-wife, encouraged Laura to walk away. they fully aware of how toxic Grant really was. But then came a twist. Laura discovered she was pregnant again. Despite everything Grant had put her through, she gave him yet another chance, even though by now it was more like chance number 10. That decision spoke volumes about how deeply Laura loved her children. She was willing to endure emotional hardship just to try to keep her family intact, likely driven by the pain of her own parents' divorce. Trying to make things work, Laura packed up her life and moved to the Virgin Islands with her son, Grant Jr., hoping proximity might help fix things. However, Grant didn't see her arrival as a loving gesture. To him, it was an inconvenience. With Laura around, he couldn't keep living a double life. Eventually, Laura gave birth to her second son, Gentle. Sadly, the baby faced serious health issues right from the start, and the family needed better access to medical care, so they relocated back to North Carolina. Grant was furious about the move. He blamed Laura and the kids for dragging him away from potential opportunities in the Virgin Islands. Meanwhile, Amanda remained in the picture, now living in New York, and urged Grant to explore opportunities in the entertainment industry there. Grant then went to be with Amanda, and he loved it. He was finally close to her, away from his responsibilities, and immersed in a city full of distractions. Eventually, he reached out to Laura with a surprising request. He asked if he could take Grant Jr. for a diaper modeling photo shoot, promising he'd bring him right back. Laura hesitated but agreed. What she didn't know was that Grant had a completely different plan. When he didn't return their son as promised, Laura turned to Facebook for clues, and what she found shattered her. Grant had secretly married Amanda in New York and was now living with her along with Grant Jr. Laura was devastated. But the nightmare wasn't over. When Laura called Grant to confront him, he claimed that their marriage was never legal. In search of clarity, Laura checked their marriage certificate and discovered that Grant's signature was missing. This meant that their marriage was never legally valid. Then came the most gut-wrenching part. Grant and Amanda had filed for emergency custody of Grant Jr. They won because there was no formal custody agreement and because Laura had no job or stable housing. The court sided with Grant. He showed up to the hearings alone and claimed Laura was unfit. The court ruled in his favor without ever hearing her side of the story. She went back to court and presented strong evidence showing Grant's abusive behavior and unstable mental health. Her determination forced the court to order psychological evaluations for both parents. In the meantime, Laura was allowed to speak with her sons daily and see them on weekends, but even then, Grant and Amanda, now pregnant with his child, found ways to make those moments unbearable. They interrupted phone calls, limited her access to her boys, and did everything possible to keep Laura at a distance. Still, Laura held on. Grant's psychological evaluation did not go well. The report highlighted that he lacked a genuine connection with his children, whereas the kids were much more relaxed and happier around Laura. In contrast, Laura was portrayed as a dedicated and caring mother who always prioritized her children. The court took these findings seriously and mandated a deeper evaluation of Grant's situation. At around the same time, Amanda gave birth to a daughter on June 9, 2011. After a lengthy custody battle, the court decided on a rotating custody schedule, with the children spending 3 days with one parent and 4 days with the other. By this point, Grant was barely holding himself together, his temper was worsening, and it was clear something was boiling beneath the surface. Then came the moment when everything fell apart. On July 13, 2011, Laura had plans to meet her close friend and business partner, Chavon, later that evening, but she never showed up and never called. At first, Chavon didn't panic. Laura had mentioned earlier that she needed to stop by Grant's place to pick up her boys. Laura's last known communication was a text Laura sent to Grant, letting him know she was on her way. He never replied. Days passed with no word, no calls, no texts, nothing. By July 18th, after 5 days of total silence, 27-year-old Laura Ackerson was officially reported missing by loved ones. Police acted quickly and searched her apartment, which appeared completely normal. There were no signs of a struggle or anything out of place. Surveillance footage revealed that she left the building but never returned. Their next stop was Grant and Amanda's apartment. Officers arrived with a search warrant and immediately felt that something was wrong. Grant and Amanda was not home. Inside the apartment, a strong smell of bleach overwhelmed them. The place had been thoroughly cleaned and was suspiciously spotless. Several items were noticeably missing: a shower curtain, a vacuum cleaner, and multiple rugs. Certain patches on the floor were discolored, indicating they had been scrubbed with harsh chemicals. However, what truly unsettled the investigators were two pieces of paper they found. The first item found was a handwritten draft of a song. The lyrics described a disturbing scenario in which a woman is murdered by strangulation. The second piece of paper appeared to be an agreement, supposedly signed by Laura, in which she stated she would give up custody of her children to Grant for $25,000. Anyone who knew Laura would recognize this as implausible. Her children meant everything to her, and she would never assign a monetary value to being with them. This agreement looked like a forgery. At this point, the police understood that they needed to act quickly. They had to locate Grant and Amanda as soon as possible. Security camera footage helped establish a timeline. After July 13th, Amanda was seen with the kids at a local Chick-fil-A, while Grant was spotted shopping early on July 14th at both Walmart and Target in Raleigh. What he bought was alarming: goggles, bleach, trash bags, tape, a reciprocating saw with blades, and a lint roller. That wasn't all. Later that day, Amanda made a peculiar request to her daughter, asking her to look after the kids for most of the day. Then, on July 16th, Grant made another unsettling purchase: large amounts of ice and coolers. Shortly after, he rented a U-Haul trailer. Grant, Amanda, and the two boys traveled to Richmond, Texas, ostensibly to visit Amanda's sister, Karen. They arrived around July 19th, but Grant made another suspicious stop at a local Home Depot, where he bought heavy-duty gloves and 8 bottles of acid. Texas police, now collaborating with North Carolina authorities, paid a visit to Karen Berry. What she told them was alarming. On the night of July 19th, Grant and Amanda had asked to borrow a boat. They wanted to go out to Oyster Creek, a remote, gator-filled canal with thick vegetation and murky water. Grant and Amanda asked whether the alligators in Oyster Creek ate humans, whether wild hogs could consume flesh, and whether bloodthirsty sharks were native to Texas waters. Karen assumed these were just strange Grant's questions, but to investigators, it was clear they were scouting for a body dump site. A team of officers was dispatched to Oyster Creek right away, while another team searched the area for surveillance footage. Both initiatives yielded significant findings. After hours of navigating through the dangerous waters filled with reeds and lily pads, the police uncovered remains in Oyster Creek. They identified the remains as belonging to Laura. The condition of her body was so severe that determining the exact cause of death proved challenging. Nevertheless, forensic experts suggested she likely died from manual strangulation or a substantial blow to the neck. The evidence was compelling: the bleach-stained apartment, the forged custody letter, unsettling purchases, disturbing song lyrics, and Laura's remains found. Her death was not due to an accident or a moment of anger. It was the result of a calculated and cold-blooded plan. Grant and Amanda were no longer merely suspects, they were now identified as murderers. When investigators found Laura's car, a white 2006 Ford Focus, it was evident that someone had made significant efforts to clean it. The interior was thoroughly washed, but there was noticeable damage to the back of the car. More incriminating evidence emerged when surveillance footage showed Amanda near Karen's home disposing of acid bottles just 13 days after Laura was last seen. The case took a significant turn on July 25, 2011, when Grant and Amanda were arrested at Grant's parents' house in North Carolina. They were both charged in connection with Laura's death. Their trials were conducted separately, and each attempted to deflect blame onto the other. Grant claimed that Laura had arrived at their apartment on July 13th and threatened Amanda, saying she would take her daughter as her own sons had been taken. Grant alleged that Amanda reacted violently during the confrontation and killed Laura, while he merely assisted in covering it up. Amanda portrayed herself as a victim, claiming that Grant had been emotionally abusive and manipulative for years. She recounted an incident where Laura and Grant had a heated argument. During the fight, Laura accidentally hit her head. Amanda claimed she didn't see this happen because she was in another room with the children. She stated that when Grant informed her Laura was hurt, he told her to leave with the kids while he called for help. After going to Chick-fil-A, Amanda returned to find Laura missing. Grant casually assured her that Laura was fine and had already left. It was only when they were in Texas, Grant confessed the truth about the incident and threatened her to help him cover it up. However, the overwhelming evidence contradicted their accounts. Both Grant and Amanda pleaded not guilty, but the court rejected their claims. On September 16, 2013, Grant Hayes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His behavior in court was unsettling. He smiled, laughed, and showed no remorse, as if he were going on vacation instead of facing justice for a horrific crime. Amanda was sentenced months later, on February 19, 2014, to 13 to 16 years in prison. During her sentencing, the judge expressed his belief that Amanda had the opportunity to prevent what happened to Laura, but instead chose to participate. Although she expressed remorse in court, many doubted its sincerity, viewing it as just another act. Amanda's legal troubles didn't end there. Texas authorities charged her with tampering with evidence, resulting in a 20-year sentence on top of her previous charges. Investigators believe that Grant deceived Laura into coming to his apartment by promising her false hopes. He told her that she would be able to see her children and possibly take them home, he claimed he was prepared to grant her full custody. This manipulation is likely why Laura traveled alone from Kinston to Raleigh, despite her friends warning her not to meet Grant without someone accompanying her. Unfortunately, Laura fell victim to a trap. One theory suggests that upon her arrival, Grant and Amanda pressured her to write and sign a custody letter, threatening her with the loss of her children if she refused. After that, she was attacked, either strangled or hit with a deadly blow. This act was cold, calculated, and alarmingly cruel. The motive? Likely, Grant intended to eliminate Laura permanently so he could live with Amanda without the complications of custody disputes and court hearings. The ultimate irony is that Amanda and Grant divorced just a year later, in October 2014. All of Grant's actions, the lies, the violence, the destruction, ultimately achieved nothing. Today, Laura's two sons and Amanda's daughter are being raised by Grant's parents, who are kind and supportive, in stark contrast to their father. It's tragic to consider the childhood these boys lost, growing up without their mother due to their father's selfishness. Laura Ackerson was a loving and creative woman. She was a devoted mother, a loyal friend, and a daughter who deserved much more. Her death was the result of severe manipulation and cruelty, emphasizing the importance of recognizing our own worth, setting boundaries, and distancing ourselves from those who would harm us, no matter how much love we feel we can give. Although Laura didn't have the chance to start anew, her story may inspire someone else to understand that it's never too late to prioritize themselves. Kathleen West was born on February 15, 1975, in Tampa, Florida, USA, as the only daughter of Nancy and John Martin. She was raised in a loving environment and her favorite activity was playing with dolls. As a high school teenager, she began her journey into the modeling industry. By the early 2000s, she was making a living as an exotic dancer. However, during this time, Kathleen frequently faced difficulties in her personal life, particularly in navigating unhealthy relationships. Kathleen developed a strong admiration for Marilyn Monroe, trying to emulate the iconic actress in various aspects of her life. However, she also faced struggles similar to Monroe's, such as depression, insecurity, and self-doubt. In response to these challenges, she sought therapy but still found herself overwhelmed by darkness, which led her to seek comfort in alcohol. Her friends and family, including her mother, noted that she sometimes drank alone after parties when everyone else had left. In 2004, during the Super Bowl celebrations, Kathleen met William Jeffrey West, an Army veteran who was 2 years her senior and the son of Carolyn and William West. Known as Jeffrey, he worked as a recruiter in the Army and was instantly drawn to Kathleen's beauty. His efforts to win her heart were successful, and she described him to her friends as the romantic partner of her dreams, the knight she had always hoped to find. Many believe he filled a void in her life and boosted her confidence. After a brief romance that began in 2004, they got married in Las Vegas. Brittany Driesler, who later became friends with them, commented that at first they seemed like an ill-matched couple. However, opposites attract, and Brittany found it hard to believe that someone like Kathleen could fall for Jeffrey. Nonetheless, one thing was clear: they were deeply in love. In 2005, they had a daughter named Logan, affectionately called Lola. From that point on, Kathleen devoted herself to raising her daughter, while Jeffrey took care of their financial needs. During their years together, they got matching tattoos on their wrists that symbolized their enduring love. They often ended their text messages with declarations of love for each other. After being together for 10 years, the family relocated to Calera, Alabama, about 10 miles south of Birmingham, so that Logan could be closer to her grandparents. Jeffrey took a job as a police officer at a local university, while Kathleen focused on being a homemaker and frequently shared updates on social media. A few years later, when a platform for adult content featuring signed models emerged, Kathleen found an opportunity to publish and sell her photos online. This allowed her to showcase a fun side of her personality, often with her husband taking the photographs. Those close to them noticed that Jeffrey did not feel embarrassed or jealous about her new hobby. However, like any relationship, theirs had its challenges. By the end of 2017, Kathleen had successfully undergone breast augmentation surgery, and they enjoyed a peaceful Christmas and New Year surrounded by family. During this time, Jeffrey earned the respect of Kathleen's parents, who welcomed him as part of the family, and Kathleen was equally embraced by his relatives. On Wednesday, January 10, 2018, Nancy and John took Kathleen for a checkup following her recent surgery, and everything seemed normal. 2 days later, on the evening of Friday, January 12, 2018, Kathleen and Jeffrey stopped at a store to buy alcohol after dining out. Security cameras recorded them purchasing a bottle of whiskey and a bottle of absinthe, with Kathleen appearing happy and relaxed. Once they returned home, they continued drinking, and Jeffrey even shared a photo of one of the bottles on social media. As they enjoyed each other's company, Jeffrey took several pictures of Kathleen, who was dressed in a pink bra, colorful panties, and high-heeled shoes. Eventually, a fight broke out between them. Under the influence of alcohol, Jeffrey expressed his frustration about Kathleen spending more time on her phone than interacting with him. In a moment of rage, he grabbed her phone and threw it outside. When Kathleen saw her phone in the street, she went outside to look for it, barefoot and in just her pink bra, completely unaware of the winter cold. At that moment, Jeffrey, heavily intoxicated, picked up a bottle and struck Kathleen on the head, delivering a fatal blow. Realizing she was no longer alive filled him with shock and fear about the consequences of finding a dead body near their home. An Army veteran helped him devise a plan. He staged the scene to look like an accident by placing a bottle of absinthe on Kathleen's broken phone and then went back inside the house, leaving the front door open. The next morning, Saturday, January 13, 2018, a neighbor named Macorsha Purifoy was driving to work when she discovered Kathleen's partially naked body in the street. Terrified, she called emergency services and mentioned seeing someone moving inside Kathleen's house. When paramedics arrived, they found that Kathleen had suffered severe head trauma from a blunt object. Half an hour later, experienced Police Sergeant Mike Melhoff examined the scene and quickly noticed 2 items near Kathleen's body. It appeared that the placement of the phone and the bottle had been staged. Additionally, 2 stains indicated that the body had been moved after the incident. After authorities found Kathleen's body, Jeffrey appeared at the door, claiming that he had been awakened by the sound of police sirens. Shelby County Medical Examiner Lena Evans arrived at the scene after being called by the police. Upon assessing the situation, she agreed with Agent Mike that the arrangement of objects at the scene appeared unusual. When Mike had a brief conversation with Kathleen's husband, Jeffrey, he noticed that Jeffrey seemed cold and detached. Initially, Mike thought this might be due to Jeffrey's personality and profession. Jeffrey explained that around 2 a.m., he had gone to bed because of pain from an old leg injury he sustained while in the Army, leaving his wife to celebrate alone. Although he admitted his memory was unclear due to alcohol, he remembered feeling irritated when his wife kept looking at her phone and throwing the device out of the house. Later, when the authorities informed Jeffrey's parents and Kathleen about the tragic news, they were unaware of the true cause of her death and sought comfort from Jeffrey. Detectives found no clear evidence that Jeffrey had harmed Kathleen and decided to investigate her background instead. On January 14, 2018, a forensic specialist confirmed that Kathleen died from blunt force trauma and noted that the 2-inch wound on the side of her head could not have been caused by an accidental fall, especially since there were no objects nearby that she could have hit. The examination also indicated that Kathleen likely tried to crawl away before dying. In terms of substances, only alcohol was detected in her blood, at levels nearly 3 times the legal driving limit. Toxicology tests of her urine and other fluids revealed that her alcohol level had been even higher at some point that night. The investigation found fingerprints from both Kathleen and Jeffrey at the scene, which was expected since they had spent the night together. As a result, the focus of the investigation shifted to Kathleen's social circle. The investigation gained momentum when detectives discovered Kathleen's active presence on social media, including an adult website. One early theory suggested that a fan may have become obsessed with her, possibly leading to her death. To explore this possibility, the team examined her contacts and followers, but this approach quickly yielded no credible suspects. Meanwhile, Jeffrey accompanied Kathleen's parents, Nancy and John, to the funeral home to assist with the arrangements. While choosing a coffin, John noticed his son-in-law in tears, struggling to cope. At that moment, John felt the pain of Jeffrey, whom he regarded as a son and who had unexpectedly become a widower. As the investigation progressed, the detectives began to view Jeffrey differently than Kathleen's family did. They grew suspicious of his potential jealousy regarding her revealing online posts and decided to question him again about his feelings on the matter. To their surprise, Jeffrey admitted that he had actually assisted her in taking the photos that her many online subscribers viewed and purchased. Notably, Agent Mike observed that Jeffrey seemed emotionally detached throughout this conversation. Detectives identified a contradiction in Jeffrey's account. Security footage revealed that the door was opened hours later than he had claimed, exactly 9 minutes before 2 a.m. on Saturday. To further investigate, they sought a search warrant for Jeffrey's phone. Once granted, investigators discovered an app tracking physical activity, which provided valuable insights. The data showed that after 11 p.m., just 30 minutes after Jeffrey claimed to be in bed, he took 18 steps. Additionally, a review of his messages uncovered arguments between him and Kathleen, including discussions about their declining relationship. However, those close to them argued that this correspondence reflected typical issues in a long-term relationship and insisted that there was no evidence of a crime. With the investigation stalled, detectives revisited the 911 call made by a neighbor, Makorsha Purifoy. They confirmed that the silhouette she saw moving back and forth was indeed Jeffrey, contradicting his claim that he had been awoken by ambulance sirens. This prompted a forensic expert to re-examine the absinthe bottle that had initially caught their attention due to a chip on the bottom, suggesting it had struck something or someone. The discovery of Jeffrey's fingerprints on the bottle, especially in a location that indicated it could have been used as a weapon, significantly changed the direction of the case. As a result, on February 22, 2018, Jeffrey was arrested for the murder of his wife, Kathleen. His bail was set at $500,000, and he maintained his innocence throughout the process. Shortly after his arrest, Agent Sean Lumley held a press conference, but during this challenging time, John and Nancy continued to support their son-in-law. The most vocal supporter was William, Jeffrey's father, who firmly believed in his son's love for his family. Before the trial began, the prosecution offered Jeffrey a plea deal that would result in a minimum sentence and 2 years of supervised release. However, Jeffrey refused to accept any compromise, opting instead to prove his innocence in front of a jury. The trial, overseen by Shelby County Judge Bill Bach, began in mid-November 2020. This case was unique for prosecutors Neil McCoy and Ben Fair because Kathleen's family supported the accused. However, due to the judge's ban on video recording in the courtroom, no audio-visual records were made of the proceedings. Following the prosecution's presentation of the evidence, the defense, led by attorney John Robbins, presented their interpretation of the events. Robbins argued that, despite some disagreements, Kathleen and Jeffrey had never engaged in serious quarrels or made threats of violence. He highlighted correspondence between the spouses that included plans for their evening together and affectionate messages. The defense highlighted that no DNA evidence, including blood or brain tissue, was found on the alcohol bottle, Jeffrey's clothing, or his hands. Additionally, there was no evidence of a fight or struggle inside the house. Addressing the prosecution's claim that Jeffrey appeared unemotional, the defense attorney argued that everyone reacts to stress and trauma differently, that Jeffrey's reaction was influenced by his military training. However, the testimony from Stephen Boudreau, a physician from the Alabama Department of Forensic Medicine, was particularly impactful. When questioned by prosecutor Ben Fair about the likelihood of a serious injury occurring from a fall, Stephen firmly stated that it was virtually impossible. In his conclusion, he mentioned that the object believed to have caused Kathleen's death had a blade but was not sharp. Over the next 4 days, the trial included various testimonies, including one from Kathleen's mother, who stated that her daughter often drank excessively and engaged in risky behavior. On November 20, 2020, Jeffrey was scheduled to testify in his defense but later communicated through his family to the judge that he had chosen to remain silent. Subsequently, the closing arguments from both the prosecution and defense took place around 5 p.m. Before the jury began deliberations, the judge informed them that, in addition to the manslaughter charge, they could also consider the charge of intentional murder as requested by the prosecutor. The defense objected to this and urged the jury to consider the lesser charge of manslaughter. The judge did not accept this request. After nearly 5 hours, around 10 p.m., the jury returned with a verdict, finding Jeffrey guilty of the lesser charge of manslaughter. He maintained a calm demeanor, showing no signs of distress or defeat. Before the hearing concluded, the judge revoked Jeffrey's $500,000 bail, ordering that he remain in custody until sentencing. Jeffrey's attorney mentioned that his client was surprised by the verdict and, despite the significant setback, he would continue to strive for his innocence. Prosecutor Neal expressed disappointment at the court's decision. Although the sentencing hearing was initially set for January 11th, it took place nearly a month later, on February 8, 2021. In this trial, Kathleen's mother, Nancy, spoke out once again, calling for mercy for Jeffrey. She described him as a good man. At the same time, Carolyn, Jeffrey's mother, also spoke about the pain their family is facing due to the trial, emphasizing the importance of having a father for Logan. Before the sentencing, Jeffrey read a prepared statement expressing his sadness about missing important milestones in his daughter's life over the past 3 years. He paused, struggling to hold back his emotions, and mentioned how he and Kathleen's family supported each other during this difficult time. He concluded by referring to his wife without naming her, stating that he had lost his best friend. The judge, considering Jeffrey's 21 years of service in the U.S. Army and his clean criminal record, sentenced William Jeffrey West to 16 years in prison, with 3 years already counted as time served while awaiting trial. 3 days later, Carolyn and John gave an interview to a major American publication, where they collectively stated that they felt Jeffrey's trial was unjust. Since then, the grandparents have been sharing custody of their granddaughter, Logan. In January 2022, the Alabama Supreme Court rejected Jeffrey's appeal. Benjamin Field was born on October 27, 1990, in Market Harborough, Leicestershire, East Midlands. His father was a Baptist minister, and his mother was a former Liberal Democrat politician who had worked for Age Concern. He had a brother named Tom and a sister named Hannah. His family was known for their large Easter egg hunts and for having Bible readings in their garden. However, some neighbors felt that the family seemed a bit distant, as if they believed they were better than others. Benjamin's father often compared himself to Jesus, which the neighbors found odd. Growing up, Benjamin and his siblings faced high expectations to not only be good citizens but also to become leaders in their pursuits. Benjamin later reflected that none of his relationships, even those with family, were based on love. He grew up in a cold and emotionless household, which led him to feel superior to others. He became arrogant and lacked empathy, traits that persisted during his time at Bishop Stopford School, where he was viewed as distant and unlikable. A former classmate noted that he seemed infatuated with his own intelligence, while another remarked that he was always a loner without close friends. There were moments when Benjamin attempted to connect with classmates, but these efforts usually occurred when he wanted something. For example, during his campaign for class president, he interacted with students as if he genuinely cared. However, after losing the election, he stopped speaking to most of them, illustrating that he viewed relationships primarily as transactions. He often spent his time in the library, reading books and learning complex vocabulary to impress others, frequently slipping these words into conversations to establish a sense of superiority. Benjamin enjoyed arguing with teachers and often corrected them in a condescending manner, which led to frequent reprimands. His arrogance, despite his intellect, hindered his potential. While his brother had already completed his math A-levels early and was set to study music at Cambridge University, Benjamin struggled with his own A-levels and finished with only average grades. Ultimately, he attended Buckingham University to study English literature, a much less prestigious path compared to his brother's achievements. At university, Benjamin maintained his unpleasant and arrogant demeanor, quickly alienating fellow students and lecturers. His arrogance and need to show off were attempts to boost his self-esteem and convince himself of a false image. Struggling academically, he sought other ways to feel powerful, which led him to develop two key habits: compulsive lying and fabricating stories about his supposed successes, such as claiming to be a playwright. Over time, Benjamin became an adept liar, using his skills to manipulate and exploit others, which further inflated his ego. He also developed a troubling fascination with elderly people and began researching topics such as euthanasia and the loneliness experienced by older individuals. Around 2012, when Benjamin was about 22 years old, he started working at the Red House nursing home in Maids Moreton, Buckinghamshire. Instead of providing care, he began to abuse the residents and even recorded his actions. Unbeknownst to him, these videos would ultimately contribute to his downfall. Benjamin viewed his actions as a means to feel powerful, failing to recognize that this behavior characterized someone who preyed on the vulnerable. Before starting his job, he met Peter Farquhar, a 61-year-old novelist and guest lecturer, in April 2011. Their relationship quickly became official through what they referred to as a betrayal ceremony. In his diary, Peter described this event as one of the happiest moments of his life, expressing relief that he no longer feared dying alone. Peter Anthony Scott Farquhar was born on January 3, 1946, in Edinburgh, Scotland, but he spent most of his life in England. While not much is known about his early years, he was clearly academically gifted. He attended Latimer School in Hammersmith, London, before he earned a first-class degree in English from Churchill College, Cambridge. Although he was a devout evangelical Christian, Peter was also gay. During his journey to find harmony between his faith and sexual orientation, he decided to remain single and devote all his energy to his passion for English and teaching. Throughout his 34-year career, Peter held various teaching positions, including 12 years at Manchester Grammar School in the 1970s and early 1980s, and 21 years at Stowe School from 1983 to 2004. He became a father figure to many students and published his first book in 2010, which told the story of a school chaplain wrestling with his Christian faith and homosexuality. Peter was well loved in his community and cherished by friends, family, but he also faced loneliness. After the death of his mother in 2002, with whom he had lived, he felt increasingly isolated. This fear of dying alone intensified as he lacked close relationships and affection. Tragically, he could not have anticipated that someone would take advantage of his vulnerability and loneliness. Benjamin recognized Peter's emotional vulnerability and later exploited it to exert control over him. After their first meeting, Peter noted in his journal that he had a pleasant experience teaching a class at Buckingham University, mentioning a particularly engaged student named Benjamin who helped things run smoothly. It became evident that Benjamin saw Peter as an easy target, lonely and susceptible to influence. Benjamin acknowledged in his journal that he wanted to take advantage of Peter's yearning for companionship and that he began grooming Peter by pretending to share similar Christian beliefs. In truth, Benjamin lacked genuine religious faith. His true motives were power and control. To get closer to Peter, he joined Stowe Parish Church, where Peter had been a regular for 2 decades. By ingratiating himself into the church community and befriending other members, he aimed to connect with more elderly individuals. Over the years, Benjamin became a church warden, volunteered, and pursued ordination as a vicar. Between 2012 and 2013, he hinted at having romantic feelings for Peter, despite being completely heterosexual and involved with several women at the same time. He manipulated those around him and concocted excuses to explain his absences, telling Peter he was away for job training while he was actually living with one of his girlfriends. In early 2013, Benjamin devised his plan. He tells Peter that he needs a quiet space to study, prompting Peter to invite him to stay at Peter's house in Maids Moreton. Benjamin took full advantage of this invitation, visiting daily and engaging in long conversations with Peter, ensuring he always did his research to sustain their discussions. He positioned himself at the center of Peter's life, frequently expressing affection and concern. Peter wrote in his journal that he hoped God would reward Benjamin for his kindness, as he was dedicated to helping elderly people with dementia at the care home. There is a tragic irony in Peter asking God to bless the very man who would later betray him. Soon after, Benjamin was given a key to Peter's home, granting him unrestricted access. With this power secured, Benjamin began persuading Peter to alter his will to leave his house to him. Benjamin developed a new plan. In October 2013, he confessed his love to Peter, a man 40 years his senior, and expressed his desire to move in with Peter. Peter was profoundly in love with Benjamin, believing he was the answer to his prayers and someone who would ensure he wouldn't die alone. Due to his inexperience in relationships, Peter failed to recognize the risks involved and did not question why a much younger man would want to be with him. Although Peter may have had concerns, he might have been too afraid to bring them up for fear of jeopardizing their connection. Their relationship seemed to be more emotional, but it held great significance for Peter. Benjamin eventually moved in with Peter on January 3, 2014, which was Peter's 68th birthday. Peter wrote in his diary that Benjamin made that birthday special by giving him a beautiful knife made of black wood and mother of pearl. Benjamin politely asked if they could get engaged, and Peter wholeheartedly agreed to it. A betrothal ceremony signifies a formal engagement but is not legally binding like a marriage. For Benjamin, it was a clever way to secure his position with Peter and edge closer to his financial goal. However, he couldn't resist boasting about his intentions online, stating that he hadn't paid for anything and that he would stick around until the person eventually passed away, calling it a win-win situation. Shortly after moving in with Peter in 2013, Benjamin began a systematic campaign of abuse and manipulation. He ordered sedatives or obtained them from the nursing home where he worked, then mixed them into Peter's food and drink. Benjamin also rearranged Peter's belongings, hid his clothes, and deleted contacts from his phone. Benjamin found sadistic pleasure in watching Peter become confused and question his sanity. Journal entries from that time indicate that Benjamin's goal for 2014 was to manipulate Peter into changing his will. By November, he succeeded. Peter altered his will to leave Benjamin half the value of the house and a lump sum of $20,000, which Benjamin later pressured Peter to raise to $25,000. Benjamin convinced Peter that the effects of the drugs he was administering were indicative of his declining health. Benjamin misled Peter into believing he needed to organize his affairs in preparation for his death, with one caveat: Benjamin could only inherit if he had lived in the house for 2 years. This meant that Benjamin's plan to kill Peter had to be postponed until late 2015. This plan was evident in a journal found by the police, where Benjamin expressed that ending Peter's life was his sole objective for 2015. They also found a drawing he made of a grave with the word goal next to it. Meanwhile, Benjamin noted in his writings that he would continue to gaslight Peter for amusement. As 2015 progressed, Benjamin's strategy escalated. Peter, unaware that the man he trusted was secretly torturing him, endured a countdown to his demise. Between early 2015 and Peter's death in October, Benjamin drugged him at least 50 times. Initially, Benjamin used sedatives purchased online or stolen from the care home where he worked, but later he introduced hallucinogens that caused Peter to experience terrifying hallucinations. Benjamin took joy in publicly humiliating Peter. A social man, Peter enjoyed attending dinner parties and going out, including theater outings. Benjamin would drug Peter before these events, ensuring he would fall asleep, struggle to communicate, and embarrass himself. Benjamin attended these outings, reveling in Peter's struggles. Over time, Benjamin manipulated Peter to the extent that he suggested Peter had developed an alcohol problem. In the months leading up to Peter's death, Benjamin worked to convince Peter's friends and family that he was battling alcoholism, even posting about it online. Peter was drugged to the point of falling and sustaining serious injuries, which Benjamin recorded in his diary. Despite becoming increasingly aware of his declining health, Peter had no idea that Benjamin was the cause. One of Peter's diary entries captures his confusion and growing worry. He mentioned that he had been feeling tired and lethargic for a few weeks and was occasionally losing his balance. He also noted that Benjamin had been very kind. Benjamin did more than just write about his crimes, he filmed them to relive his sense of control. On at least one occasion, he recorded Peter while Peter was bedridden and under the influence of a banned substance. In the video, Peter can be heard mumbling incoherently. As Peter approached death, his journal entries became increasingly odd, as he was convinced he was losing his sanity. By July 2015, just 3 months before Peter was murdered, Benjamin had increased the dosage of hallucinogens he was giving Peter. This exacerbated Peter's condition, leading to frequent night terrors and disturbing hallucinations. In August 2015, Peter attended the launch of a novel he had written years prior, which had just been published. This event showcased Peter's declining health. He appeared confused, embarrassed, and struggled to stay awake. He had difficulty signing copies of his own book and spoke with a slur. Benjamin was present and fully aware that he was the reason for Peter's suffering. He continued to spread the false narrative that Peter was an alcoholic to isolate him from anyone who might suspect the truth. Between April and August 2015, Peter was hospitalized multiple times due to falls, hallucinations, and extreme tiredness. Each stay involved a brief admission during which he showed some improvement, but he returned home only to be drugged again by Benjamin. Benjamin was aware of a condition in Peter's while stating that he could not inherit anything until living with Peter for 2 years, a term that would expire around September 2015. Until then, Benjamin focused on torturing Peter rather than killing him. After that deadline, however, Benjamin decided he wanted to murder Peter. The constant use of sedatives and hallucinogens pushed Peter into deep despair, leading to feelings of wanting to end his life. In response, Benjamin suggested that Peter's symptoms could be early signs of dementia and implied that this might be a solution. Although Peter struggled with his thoughts, he was not ready to end his life. When Benjamin realizes that he cannot manipulate Peter into harming himself, he decides to go ahead with the murder. There appears to have been at least one unsuccessful attempt on Peter's life prior to the fatal assault in October 2015. On October 3, 2015, Peter was admitted to the hospital after being found unconscious at home by his cleaner. He had high levels of sedatives and alcohol in his system, raising concerns about a possible attempt at self-harm. When asked, Peter could not remember anything and denied any intentions to harm himself. After a short hospital stay, he was discharged and returned home. In reality, Benjamin had drugged Peter and forced alcohol into him, hoping the combination would be lethal. However, this attempt failed. A few weeks later, Benjamin made another attempt, and this time he succeeded. On October 25, 2015, Benjamin again drugged Peter, ensuring he was heavily sedated and too intoxicated to resist. To make sure Peter was dead, Benjamin suffocated him, likely with a pillow. Once he was certain Peter was dead, Benjamin left the scene. The next day, Peter's cleaner called emergency services, reporting that Peter was unconscious and not breathing. When responders arrived, they found Peter dead on his sofa, next to a half-finished bottle of whiskey. Benjamin's manipulative actions had led to a tragic conclusion. The coroner determined that Peter died from acute alcohol intoxication while at home alone. Initially, his death was not deemed suspicious. He was buried, and his will was executed. Benjamin inherited $77,000 from the sale of Peter's house, which he used to buy a flat for himself. It is heartbreaking to consider that Peter spent his final years believing he had found someone who loved and cared for him, only to discover that this trusted person was planning his death. Eventually, Benjamin was caught and taken to court, where he admitted to drugging Peter, claiming he did it because Peter's nighttime activities disturbed his sleep. One of the most heartbreaking pieces of evidence is a photo of Peter's face, bruised from the fall. In the months leading up to this tragic incident, Peter suffered from a mysterious illness and consulted many doctors, undergoing numerous tests. Meanwhile, Benjamin calculated his actions carefully, often calling emergency services to falsely suggest that Peter was showing signs of dementia. Benjamin's manipulative behavior extended beyond Peter. In November 2014, he met Anne Martin, whom Peter had introduced him to, and exploited her loneliness for his benefit. Although he was 57 years younger than her, he was able to win her affection. He even took a compromising photo to manipulate her into becoming closer to him. Benjamin gifted Anne various items, including a framed picture that said he would always be with her. She displayed it prominently to indicate her feelings for him. He also gave her a hand counter and instructed her to click it every time she thought of him. In her notes, she recorded how frequently she used the counter and expressed her love for him. Continuing his deceit, he fabricated a story about needing a new car and managed to obtain $5,600 from her. He even told Tom's brother that he was suffering from severe kidney disease and needed a dialysis machine, but that was a lie. Nevertheless, Anne believed him and transferred $35,000 to him. Worse still, he manipulated her during a phone call with the bank, making her believe that the money would save his life. She genuinely cared and told the bank that she didn't want to selfishly keep the money for herself. Benjamin's deceit didn't end there. He wrote fake messages on her mirror, pretending they were from God, to persuade her to change her will in his favor. It is absurd to think that she could be led to believe that God wanted her to leave her house to him. Fortunately, before she passed away from natural causes in May 2017, she was able to change her will to leave her money to her family instead. Anne's niece testified in court about her aunt's gradual realization of the deception by Benjamin. She described meeting him at her aunt's house after her aunt's hospitalization, mentioning his strange behavior. When asked if he had taken any money or attempted to alter her aunt's will, he denied it and claimed to be in love with her aunt. However, she found this quite laughable and suspected that his true motive was merely her aunt's wealth. During Anne's hospital stay, Benjamin attempted to visit but was denied access. In response, he called the police to inquire about the situation, revealing that his calls were more about understanding how much the police knew about him than concern for her well-being. After a decision was made to exhume Peter's body, a second post-mortem found that he had consumed less alcohol than previously thought and had sedatives in his system. Dr. Brett Locke, a consultant forensic pathologist, testified that Peter died from a combination of alcohol and lorazepam, which could have impaired his breathing, and he could not rule out the possibility that Peter had been smothered. Toxicology results indicated that Peter had been exposed to lorazepam and other sedatives repeatedly in the months leading up to his death. When police searched Benjamin's home, they found various items, including diaries with a list titled 100 clients. Benjamin explained that these were potential targets for fraud or other schemes, and the list included his own family members along with Anne Martin. Authorities also discovered books about poisoning and planning to end his life. An investigator commented that Benjamin seemed to enjoy causing pain for financial gain and control. While he denied intending to kill Peter, he admitted to lying to them and Anne, and he confessed to obtaining money using fake names. During Benjamin's trial, his friend, magician Martin Smith, faced charges of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and burglary. Benjamin was arrested in January 2018 and was informed of his rights during the trial, including a warning that he did not have to say anything that might harm his defense. After his arrest, psychiatrists diagnosed him with either narcissistic personality disorder or psychopathic personality disorder. On August 9, 2019, he was found guilty of murdering Peter in 2015, although he was acquitted of attempting to murder and Moore Martin, who passed away from natural causes on May 12, 2017. In the same trial, Benjamin admitted to committing fraud and burglary involving both Peter and Anne. In October 2019, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 36 years. One family member expressed their concerns, stating that they hoped he would not be released until the authorities were completely assured of the circumstances. Martin Smith's role in the case remains unclear. He was ultimately found not guilty of all charges. Although there were suspicions that he might have been involved in Benjamin's schemes, the court did not find enough evidence to connect him directly to the crimes. Similarly, Tom Field, Benjamin's brother, was also acquitted of a fraud charge. If it hadn't been for the investigation that continued after Peter's exhumation, Benjamin might have been freed. Why do you think Benjamin Field targeted Peter Farquhar and Moore Martin? Was it solely for financial reasons, or do you believe other psychological factors were involved? Please share your thoughts in the comments if you'd like to see more videos like this.